い全国大会目指して頑張ってみたいかあの若い頃の気持ちを取り戻せたら良いのにもしよろしければ行きましょうか願いが叶う街にそう時間楽しい年に行くもしかして知ってるのやのととすがり出会うやなものって答えそうかもしれない知りて素晴らしいものそれは救いの旅路だ我々の忘れおいでこれは愛の告白願って忘れましょう成長の苦悩世界を恋になり風の合う顔を叫んで気合い入れよう恋の願うの今日の京都ベケーション京
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to kick back, relax, and talk about some anime this week on the show. We are continuing our watch through of Sound Euphonium. Last week we watched all of Season 1, and now we're going to talk about all of Season 2. Sound Euphonium continues to be a hell of a show. As good as Season 1 was, I like Season 2 even more. This show is fantastic.
Sean, it's definitely a great show. I will not take anything away from that. I was slightly more down on Season 2, not in any of this is bad way. I can get into it later. It was not quite as to my taste as Season 1, but I was expressing this to my brother, Thomas, who we talked about maybe having on the show this week. He couldn't be on the show this week because he's currently driving here to Iowa to do something with me, so he's on the road out in Nebraska somewhere as we're recording this. Hopefully doesn't get lost in Nebraska. But he is actually, someone who lived this whole kind of experience that is in the show we've talked about before. He's a musician. He did this kind of concert band, just in America, not in Japan. But he did live in Japan for a year and talk to people about it. So he's very, has a different, I think, valence on it than we do, and than I do, certainly. And so he gave me some thoughts on it that made me come around on a little more. Again, my thoughts would be, very mild criticism, nothing like, I think this show went off the rails or anything. There were just some things that I probably preferred about Season 1, but we can get into all of that later. And Thomas did send some thoughts along to read that I think are good from someone who, this resonates with on a really personal level. So, yeah. We'll get into that later.
Yeah. For me, I think there's just a sense with Season 2 that you really hit the ground running, right? Season 1 took a little bit to find itself. Not that it was ever bad, but, it had that sort of okay, we're exploring and kind of figuring out exactly what the tone and style is of the show, which locked in on that episode 8 episode at the festival, the fireworks festival and all that kind of stuff. For me, Season 2, it just sort of hits that tone. It's so confident immediately with a double part or double length opening episode. And then there's something, part of it is also very focused in the back half on my favorite character, Asuka. And I think everything they do with that character is just so fascinating. But there's just a phenomenon I felt when I was going through and I was doing my screenshots and stuff for these batch of episodes. And there were multiple directors here, particularly Ishidate Taichi and Yamamura Takia, that I think both of them have done their best work on this season.
Yes.
Ishidate Taichi, who does episode 9, that's the episode of this season to me. It's just incredible. That's the one where they go to Asuka's house, or she goes to Asuka's house. Amazing episode. Then Yamamura Takia does episode 10, the one after that. Both of those just incredible episodes. And I think kind of top to bottom, this season has so much incredible work with its characters and the character drama, and really digging into the psychology of these teens and the issues that they're dealing with, and particularly with Kumiko, who has this very interesting thing of she sort of has all these different women in her life that she's kind of squashing together in a way, where she's got her older sister, she's got Reina, she's got Asuka, and she's kind of trying to maneuver through that and how it reflects on her her history, her relationship with music, and all those kinds of things. And I think when the season comes full circle, which it does at the end, and you get the reveal of the notebook and all of that, I think it just has this cumulative impact that's so kind of staggering. I found this season really incredible.
I think it's excellent, and I think the last couple episodes are phenomenal. I think the animation throughout is even better than in season 1. The performance scenes are even better. I think there's something about the color work in this season that I think is even deeper and richer than we saw in season 1. All of that is phenomenal. I think tonally, I find the season a little monotonal, and I think I find it a little overly melodramatic. I think there's a repetition in just how many episodes, and with Kumiko running up to someone, stopping dramatically, and then screaming a large confession while she is crying hysterically. That scene happens so many times that it got a little bit repetitive for me, and I think the two main story arcs with your Nozomi and Mizore, and then the Asuka arc, I think both are probably at least an episode too long for me in terms of how many times we kind of have to go through the cycle to get to whatever the ending is. But I find those to be fairly minor criticisms. I still think it's very powerful, and I think the last couple episodes land the ship incredibly effectively to the degree that it just feels like the series is over, and I'm very, excited to see what they do next, because it ends with a real sense of finality to the story so far, but obviously there's a lot more to go.
Yeah, I can kind of see those criticisms. I don't think I really felt it. I think partially because Kumiko is she was such a kind of restrained character for so long that I think this sort of prolonged, she is completely breaking out of her shell, and so she is trying to really reach out and connect to people. I don't think I felt the repetitiveness there, but I can kind of see what you're saying of that there maybe could have been trimmed in a couple of places. But overall, I just think this season, 2 thumbs up. It is a hell of a thing.
I would still give it 2 thumbs up too. The point of 2 thumbs up is it's 2 separate critics doing it, but I guess
4
we also
thumbs
do
up.
have.
Okay, it's you and me.
Sure, I would co-sign on that.
Yes, it's the only rating system that matters. Is do you give it a thumbs up?
All right.
All right, so let's get into the history, which is very brief here because we went over, obviously, the bulk of it with season 1. There's not, a huge amount because there's not a huge gap between season 1 and season 2, but there are a couple of things that are interesting. One of just, I think people, based on what I've heard people talk about the series, I think kind of misunderstand the relationship between the show and the novels in terms of the release schedule. We kind of covered this a little bit last time, but it's worth it going over. So, as a recap, remember that when they did season 1, there was only the one novel. So season 1 covered the entirety of the original novel, and at that point there were no additional novels. And so the idea for creating a second season of the show only happened during the development of season 1, so about halfway through making season 1, that is the point at which it became clear that, there are going to be more books, because the author of the novels, Takeda Ayano, she started writing the sequel novels while the anime was in pre-production. So she created 2 novels that released in short succession. Sound Euphonium 2, The Hottest Summer of Kitauji's High School Concert Band, which is the Nozomi and Mizore novel, and ends with a concept competition, and then Sound Euphonium 3, The Greatest Crisis of Kitauji's High School Concert Band, and that's Asuka's story and ends with nationals. Those 2 novels were released in March and then April 2015. So again, they're released one right after the other. The staff of the anime were informed about the sequels while they were being written, and that is the point at which they expressed interest in continuing the adaptation. And at that time, the director Ishihara was told that the plan ultimately was to continue the books all the way through to Kumiko's graduation, and he was enthusiastic about wanting to do the full adaptation, which of course now is coming to fruition because the books are done, at least the Kumiko books are done. That's what season 3 currently that is airing as we're recording this podcast, that is her 3rd year in high school. Presumably that ends with her graduation. So season 2 was announced at the premiere of the movie compilation version of season 1, which that aired or premiered in theaters April 23rd, 2016. So at that point, they officially announced, hey, we're making more of the anime that's going to adapt these other 2 books. Season 2 aired for 13 episodes from October 6, 2016 to December 28th, 2016. And in terms of reception and stuff, season 2 is very similar. It had the same kinds of sales as season 1 overall, just a little bit lower, but not in a particularly notable way. And then they did make a compilation movie of season 2 That premiered September 30th, 2017. For whatever reason, that one grossed notably less. It was 134 million yen, which is almost 100 million yen less than the previous compilation movie. I do not know why. I've not seen either of the compilation movies. I don't know if, and I didn't really look at the competition. But that's most of the like sort of history notes I have. Is just as interesting to me that how like in concert the development of this anime was with the writing of these sequel novels. It is not a thing that you usually get where, oh, the novels are a few years old and then now we're going to start doing the anime. It was really kind of lock and step with each other.
Well, and it also shows how enthusiastic the anime staff were to continue this story. To the degree that, like, I mean, it's important to remember the season airing now, it's a full 8 years after the last season. It's, you know, and there was a lot that happened in the middle. They made 2 movies. There was the fire. Obviously, a lot has happened over at Kyoto Animation, but that's a really long gap between 2 seasons of anime. And I think it just speaks to they were in this for the long haul, you know, a full decade ago at this point.
Yeah.
And that's cool. One question I have here, is this the first season of anything KyoAni related that does not have an OVA?
Oh, man. No, because Haruhi does not.
Haruhi does not. But everything else we've watched has had an OVA, right?
Yeah, most stuff has had OVAs. There are a series of shorts. I have not actually watched the shorts for season 2, so they did do some shorts for this, but there's no OVA, yeah. Which is most things have had an OVA. Not quite everything, but most things.
But I don't think much from this point on has OVAs. Like Violet Evergarden. Well, no, they had an extra episode, but I guess
Violet
how did
Evergarden
that air?
has one.
Okay, it does? Okay. I was just wondering if they started to abandon that strategy in this era, but I guess not. It's just a one-off. They didn't do one. Okay.
I think that probably they just... I don't think there's a spot to do in OVA. That's kind of like this show ends with such a, like, either you're starting with her second year in high school, or like where is the space to do the OVA? Like there's kind of no room for it, kind of feels like. Whereas season 1 there was such a clear spot, and there I know that was based on one of the side short stories. You know, potentially they could have done, I don't know, there's the girl who's at the Rika marching band, the voiced by Takeda Ayano. I know that girl has like a whole series of novels, so I don't know if there's somewhere some side story to be told.
Well, the side story that they do after this season is Liz and the Bluebird. So that might be the answer, is that instead of doing 30 minutes of animation, they did 90 and put it in theaters. So, yeah. That makes sense.
Yes, it is an unusual trend that there's no OVA here.
I just felt, I got to the end and then I was like, oh, I'm done. I don't have any more anime homework to do. Usually with a KyoAni thing, I have 1 or 2 more things to watch once the season is over, because they are overachievers. But no, we were done. All right. But what about the crew, Sean? Who's working on this one?
It is literally the exact same, other than obviously we'll go over the episode director. So overall director, it's Ishihara Tatsuya again. The series composer in terms of the writing, Hanada Juki. Series Inshitsu, once again, is Yamada Naoko, who, just as a reminder, made fucking a silent voice in between these 2 seasons of anime, so that's crazy. Character design and chief animation director is once again Ikeda Shoko. Musical instrument animation director is once again Takahashi Hiroyuki. The composer for the music is again Matsuda Akito, that continued to do incredible work here. And then episode directors, this one is interesting because we've got more like multiple people tackling episodes for this one. So Ishihara Tatsuya directed, broadly speaking, episodes 1 and 13. But episode 1 is co-directed with Fujita Haruka, and who did the episode 8 last season. Episode 13, the last episode, that one is completely co-credited on both direction and storyboarding between Ishihara Tatsuya, Yamada Naoko, and Kawanami Eisaku. Which is like weird that it's not a like, oh, this person did the storyboards, this person did directing or whatever. It is all 3 of them are just plopped in the center. They did both sections. So that's interesting to me. Takamoto Yasuhiro directed episode 2, but the storyboards for that one were done by Ishidate Taichi. So this is a very rare season where Takamoto Yasuhiro did not do the storyboards for an episode. That's almost never happened. Yamamoto Takuya did episodes 3 and 10. Ogawa Taichi did episodes 4 and 11, though episode 11 was storyboarded by Fujita Haruka. Kigami Yoshiji did episodes 5 and 12, but both those episodes he co-storyboarded, so storyboards on 5 were with Ishihara, storyboards on 12 were with Yamada, so again, both of those people worked on the storyboards. The Kawanami Eisaku did 6 and some of 13. Fujita Haruka was completely responsible for 7, but again, she co-directed episode 1 and did the storyboards for episode 11. Kitano Hara Noriyuki just did episode 8, Ishidate Taiji did episode 9, but also, again, he did the storyboards for episode 2. So this one's a more convoluted web of credits of people sharing episodes, doubling up on episodes, stuff like that.
And I think you can see why. This is an extremely complicated season.
Yes.
Like, because if you're looking at which are the episodes where there are those breakdowns, it's either like episode 1, which is a full double-length episode, so of course that's going to be more than one person usually. Episode 5 with Kigami, I think you can tell exactly what Ishihara storyboarded, which is the first half, and I think you can tell what Kigami did, which is the second half, which is the performance. 13 is a wildly complicated episode that has a lot of moving parts and has a very, like, in-depth performance scene. So it kind of makes sense that this was broken down this way, because this is one of the more ambitious seasons visually we've seen them do. And honestly, I would say the animation overall, like, I think this is up there with Hyoka as like one of their best animated pieces of TV work. If their best animated piece of work ever is probably as a movie, A Silent Voice, this is about as good as it gets on TV, maybe just a touch below Hyoka, but also it has stuff that Hyoka didn't have to deal with, like instruments, so it's wild.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's like, as good as season 1 looked, it's a noticeable improvement here. And again, they have multiple episodes here that for those specific directors and storyboard artists are like maybe their best stuff they've done to date.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a gorgeous show. The colors are gorgeous. And one thing is just like kind of happened in the background is it feels like Fujita Haruka has kind of become a new, she's kind of one of these rising star sort of figures, because she, just to recap, so she did episode 8 last time, but where we first met her was she was one of the, like, I forget what the exact title was, but like assistant director kind of role on the Kyokai no Kanata, Beyond the Boundary, on the movies for that one, right? And so then she goes on to be the series institute credit on Violet Evergarden. So there's, right, and she kind of is like, if you read between the lines, sort of Ishidate Taichi's protege here, who, again, he does some work on here that feels like it's this is the Ishidate Taichi who's going to, in a few years, be the main director on Violet Evergarden. Like, his style, I think, has evolved. You can kind of see it here. But it's interesting that, as someone who, for me, has seen Violet Evergarden already, you can really see that this show feels like it's a stepping stone for those people to get to what they're going to do on that show. Fujita Haruka has very quickly become like one of the most interesting directors in this kind of newer phase of KyoAni's history.
Yes, absolutely. And I assume will at some point in the future have her own show. Like, it feels like she's gone up all the steps at a certain point that a future KyoAni work, I would not be surprised if she is the lead on it. Mm-hmm. And I would be very excited to see that when it happens. Yeah,
because it's I mean, everyone did really good work. She, in particular, it's like incredible. Like between last season and this season. So,
yeah, absolutely. All right, and then the music. I think the music is an interesting case here because I think the opening, Soundscape by True, is even better than the opening last year. I really like this opening. Mm-hmm. And then I think the ending, Vivace, is also good, but not quite as good as the Tutti ending from season 1. And I think so it kind of flips for me this year.
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that. Neither of them are like stand out to me as being particularly amazing openings or endings for KyoAni. They're not bad, but they're not like in like the top of the heap. But yes, they're good. It is a thing where, again, I know I'm talking about Violet Evergarden a lot, and we haven't gotten to that show, but True does the opening for that show, and it just, as someone kind of biased coming from this other perspective, it just feels like True is being misused here. That's like, it's not quite to that band and that singer's real kind of strength to do this more kind of J-poppy song, and something a little bit slower, like the song Sincerely she does for Violet Evergarden. I think it just like fits her style a little bit cleaner. But I continue to very much enjoy what they do with the endings. I like that they've kept Zach is written like a dozen songs for them from like 2013 to like 2016 between this and Love Chunibu and Other Delusions. She's done so many fucking songs and they're all really good. So still very good openings and endings.
Yeah, and I just actually want to pause and praise Soundscape. Like I do think like it gets even more a little bit of that marching band or concert band style quality to it, especially in the opening. Something we didn't mention with season 1, but we should, is this show does a really slick thing of having the beginning of the song under the recap. and then that music builds into the full like blooming of the opening credits, and I think it's very slick in season 1. I think the opening to soundscape is so good it's even better here. And they do something really cool where for the first 5 episodes up through the end of the sort of regionals competition, the Kansai competition, the first half of the opening is in black and white and is a lot more sort of stark. And then it explodes into color starting on episode 6 after they've gone through all of that and are now going to nationals. And I just thought that was a really, really cool touch that I haven't seen a show do something quite like that. And I liked that little touch that they do to kind of use the opening to kind of signal everyone's state of emotions.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I do really like the big hits they do, the bum 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 bum. Like that captures, as you say, some of that concert band energy, which is very cool.
I still continue to think the best opening for this show probably would just be an actual concert band piece, like a la the version we got at the end of season 1 over the credits, where it is the concert band version of the original opening by True. Like something like that would probably be best, but that's not necessarily what sells the CD singles, and even KyoAni is not immune to that force of gravity.
Yes, you got to get that like hit single, you got to get that J-pop album out there. It's got to, the wheels must turn on capitalism in the business. It's very understandable.
Yes, it is fine. It is good stuff. Sean, transitioning into talking about the main show, I actually want to use Thomas's statement here at the beginning because I think it frames a lot of the themes that we want to go into, and it will give you a chance to make fun of me because he spends the whole statement making fun of me for very mildly criticizing the season in his presence. And I want to stress, I was talking to Thomas, and it was last night, we were playing Call of Duty, I was talking about Sound Euphonium, I hadn't watched the last 3 episodes, but I was saying... he was asking me how I liked it. I said, I probably like it slightly less than season 1. Again, this was a very mild criticism. And I said, basically the reasons I told you earlier, Sean, and it's a couple things for me. I think it does lean into a sort of, there's a little more melodrama than like was quite to my taste, I guess. I don't know how to say this. But there was that side of it. There was that little bit of, I felt like things were maybe a little too elongated. And I missed having Reina in the show as much. Like, she really is backgrounded this season until the last couple episodes. And I was a little bummed out about that because I think in the first season, I would have considered her and Kumiko effectively co-protagonists at a certain point. And I kind of assumed the show would be more about them. And Reina is not a major character this season. And so some of that I was a little more down on. Again, I would not have been as down, and I wasn't down that much after I saw the finale, and I do think it comes together in a way that, in the same way season 1 does, I think it's a slow burn for KyoAni. Like, I think you have to get to the end to fully realize why they've done everything they've done along the way, and that is I want to be clear, that is a good thing. I like this season. But I made those very mild criticisms, and Thomas started making fun of me, and then wrote this thing. So Sean, do you want to go ahead and read Thomas's statement that slanders me and praises Sound Euphonium?
Yes, so I have not seen this beforehand. Jonathan just instructed me to open this up before we started the podcast, and all I have seen so far is the first page, and I will begin reading from here. So this is the occasional Thomas here, Jonathan's brother. He says, "My statement. For your convenience, I have inserted 12 page breaks to ensure this is read live and not early by mistake or on purpose." So I've read that warning just to make it clear. Thomas, there's no chicanery going on here. I'm now going to scroll for 12 pages to eventually get to where the actual statement begins. Still scrolling. Okay, at this point, I will again insert 12 page breaks. Alternately, you can click here to skip 12 pages. I'm not going to click there. I'm not going to do what you tell me to. I'm going to keep scrolling.
It's a good thing you did that, because that is a joke that skips you to the end of the document and fucks everything up.
Well, there we go.
I discovered that when I first went through it. So, all right.
All right, so now I have scrolled. I'm on page 25 of this document.
The statement is only 2 pages, but he sent us a 39-page PDF because he was trolling us.
Okay. I'm glad that it's because I was like, but I'm going to have to read 14 pages of this because that's going to be most of the podcast. Okay, good. So this is this is Thomas's statement on Sound Euphonium 2. He says, "Jonathan is an entirely insane whack job who apparently hates Sound Euphonium 2. Worse still, he is a liar who's too crazy to understand how good Sound Euphonium 2 really is. This 5,270 character statement, I will attempt to briefly explain why. Sound Euphonium, in parentheses 1, which I appreciate that. It is not technically called Sound Euphonium 1, but it helps us, designate which one is the first season, moves very quickly through its story. That isn't necessarily to say it rushes, that's the movie's job, but it doesn't have too much time to linger on specific plot points for too long. By comparison, Sound Euphonium 2 has more multi-episode arcs, or phrases were I pretentious to the point of insisting to use musical verbiage, which Jonathan seems to hate because of his diagnosed clinical insanity. He claims they move slowly, failing to realize that, like Reina's trumpet solo, slower sections in art allow the audience to sit with specific themes, motives, and deliver more impactful, meaningful resolutions, cadences. The longer arcs explore characters that would feel rushed were their stories condensed into a single episode. Mizore and Nozomi's story, which I like to call the Liz and the Bluebird prelude, is my personal favorite as it explores a darker side of Reina and Kumiko's relationship. The two have lost their reasons to play music, yet Mizore continues to play having lost her inspiration. Before this is revealed and resolved, we get to see her in this state that every artist, and probably every person, though less directly, has experienced, where one continues to strive for something without any reason. Not seeing how beautiful and poignant the story is truly the definition of lunacy. Also, I know you haven't watched it yet, but Liz and the Bluebird is one of the best things KyoAni has ever made. This arc is the introduction. No, it's not fair to criticize you for this, but I'm going to continue to criticize you anyway. Everyone knows that Asuka is the best, despite all her flaws and lies. Everyone, except Jonathan, a verifiable madman. Her arc, culminating in the aptly named episode Sound, Euphonium, is extremely relatable for any band nerd, although I am curious how relatable it is for other former teenagers. But most importantly, it is an explicit exploration of the transient nature of being in high school band, or of being young in general. For Asuka, like many in the band, they will not continue this activity past high school. Even if they were to do it professionally for the rest of their lives, it will never be like it is in high school. Asuka's father's involvement with the finals adds an extra layer of complexity to this feeling. But even beyond that, she has to grapple with the possibility of being finished before everyone else, and not on her own terms. I assume this is true of many people's primary extracurricular activity in high school, but band, or euphonium in her case, is basically one's entire meaning for existence for 3 or 4 years, and then one day, it's just over. And depending on your reasons for continuing with music, as explored in the prelude to Liz and the Bluebird, this can be really difficult to recover from. It's something we all know awaits us, time and time again, but there really isn't a way to prepare for it. Asuka's arc here explores her absence and raises these questions about meaning and art in general, but more importantly, for Kumiko, it reveals that the third years are still kids, not much different from her. For all her bluster and attitude, Asuka lies constantly about what actually matters to her, and Kumiko is more well-equipped to see this and to confront her on it than the other third years, which really kicks off her journey of personal growth over the next 2 years. Failing to realize this is, once again, akin to the mental delusions of one who murders and eats their fellow human.
Wow, thanks, Thomas.
You know, I can't argue with it. In the end, we see Kumiko confronts her sister, who we know is dealing with her own problems as well. They've had a strained relationship this entire time, but Kumiko is able to be honest and introspective because of what she has seen and been a part of over the past year. I love the euphonium. I love it because you were there. I love band because you were there. I love you. That's in quotation marks. He's quoting Kumiko there.
He's not saying he loves me because he's insulting me. He doesn't love me anymore because I said I like Sound Euphonium 2 slightly less than Sound Euphonium 1. And so I am a veritable madman.
Yes. Who murders and eats their fellow human. As in life, these moments are brief and fleeting, but they reveal to us the fundamental truth that we are who we are because of the things we enjoy, the experiences we love, and the people we cherish. Finally, what is Sound Euphonium? It's an anime and a series of books. In the story, it's this piece of music written by Asuka's father, passed down to her and then to Kumiko. Really, it's a piece of art that represents all of these very real emotions. And like all good art, it expresses these feelings, frustrations, and obstacles better than words ever could. It seeks to resolve or at least alleviate the pain they cause, both for the performer and the listener, if only for a brief moment. Sound Euphonium 2 is not a perfect work of art, there's no such thing. But it does succeed in expressing itself in telling a story that challenges us to find our truest selves behind all the noise and bustle of everyday life. Even if the answers aren't complicated, it doesn't mean they aren't important. Why does Kumiko love the euphonium? Why do I love music? Why do you love anime?
And that's the end of the statement. Okay, putting aside all the insults to me.
No. There's on the last page, it says, haha, just kidding, you've gone too far now. We'll need to click here to try again from the beginning. Fuck you, Thomas. I didn't click on you. I did not fall into your foolish trap. I'm no Jonathan.
Okay. Now that we've all shit on Jonathan for a couple minutes there, which, I think is necessary once in a while, here's the thing. I think that's a beautiful statement Thomas wrote. I think it encompasses a lot of what makes this season special. And I have to say, after he also said a lot of these things to me while we were talking and playing Call of Duty last night, I was being a little careful with what I was saying earlier in the podcast, because I absolutely do feel that, like, talking to Thomas about this transformed my thoughts on the season a little bit. Because I think I saw a lot of that was there, but the valence for me was a little different, because this is a very different season than season one. I think that's an interesting thing about it. And, the things I liked in season one tended to be more of the Kumiko Reina dynamic and the kind of procedural being in a band, playing in the band, practicing your instrument, all that stuff. And most of that is not really in season two. Like, the Kumiko Reina stuff is much more down the layers of importance. It really only comes up in the last couple of episodes. And then in terms of playing and practicing, we just don't see much of that. And that's fine. And Thomas actually pointed out that there's actually a good reason for that, which is that once you're at the stage that the Kitauji band is here, there's kind of nothing more dramatically to show, because they are just rehearsing the same piece over and over again. Anyone who is playing in the band at this point would be over whatever, yips they would have with their instruments or anything like that. And really, we get a little bit of that with Mizore, where she's playing, but it's not passionate, and we get that. But it's less about the technique and the technical side of music than you get in season one. And that makes sense. Again, as Thomas said, they would be past a lot of that stuff in terms of where they are, and you would presumably get stuff like that if they started working on another piece and if they had first years again.
Yeah, there's only so many times you could possibly show a big, expensive scene of them playing the same piece of music. Right. I appreciate that we get it in episode 5, but it makes sense that, it makes sense to me that, for instance, we don't see it at the very end, because it's presumably, it's basically the same performance you saw in episode 5. It's just at the level of nationals, that performance is no longer worthy of getting a gold medal. It needs to evolve to the next level, and it failed to do so. And I kind of like that aspect. I think they get across the sense of the band is very good, but they probably, episode 5 was kind of like the peak of what they hit.
Yes.
And they're not yet at the level to be able to go beyond that.
In part because they do spend most of the intervening time kind of anxious about different interpersonal things.
Yes, the development of the band gets fucked up because Asuka's not there.
Anyway, but so I talked about all that, and I think so I was a little bit feeling like, having watched this, that okay, this season is really good, but it's focusing a little bit more on kind of the interpersonal melodrama that was not my favorite thing in season 1 and wasn't necessarily what I was loving the show for, but I still think this is extremely well done and all of that. And I think Thomas, in his statement and then to what he was saying to me, was just pointing out that to him, it felt very different that this season went much deeper with what it's like to be in a band, because it got into a lot of the kind of psychology of doing this, of it being transient, of being in a band, and how obsessive that is, how hard it is to kind of... He also said something that he didn't put in his statement, but I thought was really smart, which he said, concert band is technically a competition, and it is very competitive, but the difference between it and sports is that you're really not competing against anyone else. There are other bands who play, and you're being judged against them to some degree, but what they do doesn't affect you. You are really competing with yourself, and it's very internal, and it leads to very internal problems and states of psychology like this season employs and kind of looks into. And to him, it felt like, just as much as season 1 really gets the technical side so right, that this got the emotional side more than any other work about band or music. And I really appreciated hearing him say that. And I think, especially then, having seen where the season ends, again, when I told him I was a little less hot on this season, I hadn't quite finished the season yet, so I didn't have my final reaction. It would have been more positive, and I do think the ending ties it all together in a way that I think makes all of that really clear. And so, yes, this is a great season of TV. And I think particularly hearing from Thomas, who, again, lived a life very much like this in high school, it's interesting to hear just how much it kind of nails, I think, the emotions of that entire state. And there's a lot of other things it gets that I think are very universal to the high school experience that I was getting as well.
Yeah, and I think I really agree with Thomas's overall take on it. I don't have as much of the, here's the concert band player perspective, but just the human being, and then also a little bit of the teacher side of it, of interacting with students like this. I think the level of understanding of the psychology of these young people is so sophisticated, and it's so well represented both in the writing, the performances, and then the direction, which I just think, again, there are some episodes here that just are so incredibly well directed that are able to capture the emotional and mental states of these people through visual imagery and editing and all that kind of stuff you want, that KyoAni is so exceptional at. And I do think a thing I thought about multiple times watching this season was season 2 of Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions, and that this kind of felt like, in many ways, what I wish that show had done, which is take the ending point of the previous season in terms of the tone and the like sort of overall space it exists in, the style it exists in, use that as a jumping on point and go further, rather than kind of resetting to 0 and going back to, okay, and now we're going to do the same for the first couple episodes. It's just sort of like light, having fun, more kind of school comedy stuff. Then it's going to slowly build up a bit more drama, right? And then kind of do the same overall structural arc as the first season. I'm really glad that they did not do that, because I think I would have been very bored in the way that I was kind of bored ultimately by season 2 of Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions. Even though the individual episodes were good, the overall season didn't compel me. And here it just feels like, okay, they're going deeper and they're going further with a lot of these ideas. It does mean that Reina is kind of left behind, but I'm ultimately fine with that, because she was like, right, season 1 was the Reina arc, and now we have the Nozomi Mizore arc, and now we have the Asuka arc. And so I'm kind of fine with the character who is a great character, but her story arc is not completely finished, but the most significant feeling part of it is kind of done. And so now she and Kumiko are like friends, and they get to hang out, and there's still a little bit more drama that happens, this whole stuff with like Taki Sensei. But her role in the spotlight has kind of been shifted onto these other characters that are the stars of the arcs that are about them, and Kumiko as the protagonist, our vehicle through visiting those characters and exploring the issues that they are going through, which are different than the issues that Reina was dealing with in season 1. And so I think the season gets to have a lot of forward momentum, pushing things to a different level, examining different areas of what it is to be in band, what it is to be a young person, what it is to have this relationship with art, and the different people that exist in that kind of framework.
I broadly agree with that, and I think there's. I like the Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions comparison, because I think that's true, and I do agree. I think it is right that this season hits the ground running. I think that premiere is phenomenal. I think that premiere, like in terms of picking up from the emotional state season 1 ends on, and then doing kind of an extended look at where people kind of their headspace is next. I think that premiere is one of the best episodes of any KyoAni show we've watched. It's fantastic. And I agree with that with the other characters we get. I do here want to have a short conversation about the Reina side of things, because I do think there is a certain awkwardness. And I flagged this for us last time in that I think in the direction of season 1, I would very much imagine when all the people involved are putting together the scenes where like they are climbing up the mountain, and all the other moments that are very heated and charged between Kumiko and Reina, I don't think they were necessarily thinking we are making a story where Reina will kind of be on the sidelines for the entire next year. That's not what those scenes read to me as. I think, and I do think there's a conversation to be had about just how intense they portray that relationship, and then it kind of goes on the back burner, and this is a tough word to use. I think there is a little bit of queer baiting going on with, like, not necessarily even intentionally, and I don't necessarily think maliciously, but I do think there is, especially when they continue to do kind of the flirtations with Kumiko and Shuichi, the most boring boy on earth, and some of those sides of things. And it does feel a little bit like, because they cannot progress the Reina Kumiko relationship, because that's not what it was necessarily written to be in the books, they kind of have to put some of those things on the back burner, and that's fine. But if I finish season 1, I don't look at that and think, okay, we're done with that story for now and we're going to go in a different direction. That feels like this was the first chapter of these people's lives in a bigger way. And I think if you were someone even more deeply invested in that as a piece of representation, because as we said, it feels pretty explicit as a piece of representation in season 1, I think you would be it would be perfectly valid to watch season 2 and feel a little bit disappointed or betrayed by the fact that it doesn't necessarily go anywhere, or that they have to put that behind and focus a little bit more on the sort of heteronormative desires that both of the characters have in the second half of this season. I don't think, again, this does not make me dismiss the season. It doesn't make me hate it. I whatever Thomas said about me, I don't feel that. I do think it's just something worth saying, where I think there is and we said this in season 1, I think there's a slight disconnect between the artists at KyoAni and what they saw in that relationship and what they brought to the forefront in the direction, the storyboarding, the animation, and what is necessarily there on the page in the story. And that's fine. That's a productive tension. That's something that makes season 1 super fascinating. But I do think when you put the two seasons right next to each other, you do feel that disconnect a little bit. And that's like probably the most significant criticism I would level at this season. And again, that's not a fierce criticism. It's just something I think is worth noting.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's 100% there. Like, they're not committing to we're taking this relationship to the next stage. Because I think part of the problem is if they wanted to have the main thing be Kumiko and Reina and continue to have that be the primary thread, I mean, at that point, they have to literally get into an explicitly romantic relationship. There's kind of nowhere to put their relationship other than that if you want to have it be in the spotlight. And obviously that is not, I have not read the books, but obviously that's not what happens in the books. And so there is a little bit of a disconnect. I do think they do a good job of trying to ameliorate that by the structure of the season, that early on they do have a lot more of like Reina and Kumiko, and they're kind of more physically intimate, right? I mean, that's episode 1. You have the fucking fireworks scene, which is incredible.
If you had a one-off random line somewhere in the premiere that someone else pointed at them and then, oh, it's cool that Kumiko and Reina are dating now, and then we never mention it again, and it was just assumed that these two are in a romantic relationship, their body language supports that throughout the entire season. And it's just like, that's happening in the background while Kumiko is dealing with other shit. That kind of feels like the way they direct it to a certain degree.
Yeah, but then the structure of the season becomes like slowly Kumiko's spending less and less time with Reina, and then eventually it becomes that like their relationship has cooled. And obviously it's filtered through this whole like crush/fascination that Reina has with Taki Sensei. But it becomes this thing where in the plot, right, like they become sort of like separated out, and then it takes then episode 11, which is storyboarded by Fujita Haruka, that did the episode 8 one. Episode 11 is the reflection of episode 8 from season 1, where they go back up to that mountain, right? They have to sort of like reconnect. And it feels like it's a little bit of a like kind of throwing you a bone here, even though the key relationship in the story at this point so clearly is Kumiko and Asuka. That's what this season is ultimately about, right? The opening scene of the season is it is the end of the season where you see the aftermath of the graduation, and Kumiko's left there holding a notebook, and she opens the notebook and you don't see what's in it. Then at the end of the season, you revisit that. Like, fundamentally, the season is concerned mostly about Kumiko's relationship with Asuka. So I think there is like a little bit of a letdown that they don't do more Reina stuff, and there is that absolutely some queer baiting going on here. Like, this is certainly not the first anime that has done this exact thing. I think they handle it better here than honestly I expected. I was a lot more worried. I'm glad that they still treat Tsukamoto Shuichi like he barely exists, and every time he's on screen, Kumiko just treats him with absolute revulsion, and I appreciate that. Like, I get that there's some sort of thing where he gets her this little hairpin or whatever, but I love that Kumiko doesn't give that dude anything. Like, no. It's honestly hard to read her having any affection for him whatsoever. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate that, he's a nice guy. He does some good stuff with, like, chatting with Kumiko's sister. And that's, like, he's a little bit useful there. But I was worried that they were going to go way harder in that direction. And really, there's not much of that at all.
Agreed, to the degree that he almost feels like the, if we're going to make the Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions comparison, he feels like the best friend from season 1, who in season 2 is only in like 5 scenes, because he's in less of this season than he is in season 1. Yeah. He's got some big scenes near the end, and I think they're well done. But yes, like, Kumiko's body language is very pointed in all of those scenes. Like, those are drawn, and often in those episodes, storyboarded and drawn by women with, I think, a certain lens on, like, what her feelings on him is, which is that, like, she doesn't think about him much at all. No. So yeah, again, this is not, it's a sticky issue to talk about, and there's no kind of perfect answer to it. I want to stress, though, my complaint is not that they then go and explore other characters. I do think another thing, if we're making the Love Chunibyo comparison, is that if Love, Chunibyo, and Other Delusions was going to have a second season where the relationship between the two main characters, Rika and Yuta, is sort of on the back burner and in a holding pattern, then the way to do that would be to have Yuta have interesting relationships with other people that are developing while the Yuta Rika stuff is sort of assumed and in the background, and they don't really strike that balance. This season effectively does that with Reina and Kumiko, where Kumiko and Reina's relationship is sort of assumed as a background element that then does come back around for us at the end in that episode 11 you mentioned, which I think is a phenomenal episode. But then it is more about Kumiko dealing with these other characters. So at the very least, it never feels like a pale or lesser imitation of season 1, which is, I think, some of the criticism towards Love, Chunibi, and Other Delusions season 2, because we're dealing with fundamentally new and different character dynamics. And I think those character dynamics are really strong. I might not have reacted to them as strongly as you or Thomas, but there's no doubt. There's, really beautiful stuff here, and Asuka in particular is a tremendous, tremendous character.
Yeah.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can support the show directly on Ko-fi at the link in the description, and remember to check out the Weekly Stuff podcast, our long-running series on movies and video games and everything else on all platforms.
And now, back to the show. So, do we have any more, around the edges stuff, up top we want to talk about, or do you want to kind of start diving into this thing?
I think we should dive into this thing, because there's, basically 2 arcs to talk about. Yes. There's the 2 books, and they're made into the first 5 episodes and the last 8 episodes. And I have some big points I want to get to. I'm just itching to talk about episode 5, basically, which is Kigami Yoshiji Strikes Back. If we're talking about, you've titled this portion of the podcast Yamada Naoko Strikes Back. That is the revenge of Kigami Yoshiji. I don't know what he's revenging other than doing his best work maybe ever, but I'm just excited to get there. But first, we've got to talk about some of our new characters.
Yes, so the first 5 episodes are all the adaptation of the second book, Sound Euphonium 2. It introduces our 2 characters that we are also going to see, as Thomas also points out in his statement, in Liz and the Bluebird, is going to be focused around these 2. It's Mizore, who is voiced by Tanizaki Atsumi, who is the voice actress of the hour right now, because she is currently Anya in Spy Family. She's Frieren in Frieren, and she's Gyokyo, one of the main characters in the Apothecary's Diaries, which apparently that mangaka recently got picked up for tax evasion. So I didn't know what's going there. I literally read that yesterday.
There are worse things mangaka have been picked up for. I was glad when you started that sentence, Sean, I went, oh no. And then you said tax evasion, and I went, oh, you know what? That's okay. Yes. I mean, he should pay his taxes, but that's not the end of the world.
Yes. But all 3 of those very, very popular shows recently, and then she's obviously done a lot of stuff. One of my other favorite performances she does is Tome in Mob Psycho 100, which if you've seen that show, that's the girl who's the regular girl who's part of the occult club who desperately wants to see other occult shit, and she just gets wrapped up in everything. It's great, but she is so good. She's just a phenomenal voice actress, but in particular in this show, I think Mizore is just an absolutely dynamite character. One, gotta shout out the character design. I love Mizore's character design so much. She just has this perfect kind of otherworldliness to her. The way her hair is shaped around her head, she just looks a little different than all the other characters, which I think ties into her story where she is a little bit different than everybody else. Where this character, I don't like going too far with this kind of stuff, because I think it's too easy to go too far with trying to diagnose fictional characters. But she reads so strongly to me as being neurodivergent, as being as someone who has taught a lot of kids who are on the autism spectrum. She reads as being on the spectrum to me very clearly. And I think they do a really good job. And again, whether you want to literally read it that way or just more sort of broadly, she's interacts with and sort of sees social interactions very different than the other students. They capture that energy with this character so well. And I think the psychology of her and her relationship with Nozomi is so perfect, and it's incredibly touching. And I think just everything they do with this character, she's just kind of a really great kind of anchor and center point for this new character and story arc.
Oh, I completely agree. Honestly, one of the highest pieces of praise you can give her is that when she shows up, for a couple scenes, I was like, oh yeah, that Mizore, I love that character in season 1. And then I go, no, wait, we didn't really see her, because she feels like she's been there. Like, she feels such an immediate, because that's a tough thing to do with a show like this, is to come back for season 2 and then immediately focus on 2 characters who you didn't, Nozomi you definitely didn't see, and then Mizore maybe you saw in the background because there is an oboist, but you didn't see a lot of. And like, that can be a tough turn to make, but I think they make that turn really elegantly. As absolutely, Atsumi Tanazaki's performance is tremendous. It's like immediately off the bat, very striking. And I agree with you about the sort of the neurodivergence. It feels like this is someone who has trouble for whatever reason opening up to people, and the relationship with Nozomi is like, when they say the relationship is traumatic, that's one of the like cliffhangers in one of the episodes, is you learn that like someone says Mizore hates Nozomi. And when you learn the backstory of it, it's not a trauma in the way it would be sort of for most people. It's a trauma in the sense that Mizore had trouble opening up to this person, felt and was sort of slighted, and had trouble, like, I think, coming out of her shell again. And I think all of that is done really beautifully in the way that, like, KyoAni, I think, is uniquely good at dealing with, like, characters with, you know, any kind of differences on this spectrum. And it's beautifully done. The other thing is that, you know, she plays the oboe. And so we get a lot of great oboe animation, which has to be the hardest thing in that band to animate, because the like fingering frets on it, or whatever you call that whole, you know, the metal board over the oboe, there's several shots where they like are clearly they've just applied a CG element to it, because like it is so ludicrously tough to draw all of that. But I was asking Thomas, because they make a big deal about her being the only oboist, and he said it is actually true that in especially high school or like early college, oboe is by far the hardest instrument to find someone good to play at that level, because oboe is just a really, really challenging instrument. And so like finding someone who is good is basically a diamond in the rough, which is part of why everyone is so worried about Mizore in that early stretch, because if they lost their only oboist, they'd be fucked. And you're not competing at nationals without that, but you can't go find another one.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, the oboe stuff is great. It's just such a good, like, it feels like the instrument fits her character design so perfectly. Like, they designed her around this instrument. I love all the stuff before the competitions where she has to, like, moisten her reed or whatever. So she just, like, has it in her mouth, and it's, like, the most adorable fucking thing in the world. Like, the way that, like, they draw her mouth having to, like, be on this, like, piece of wood or whatever, it's fucking great. I love it.
One of my favorite moments in the season is in episode 12, before they go out to play on stage. She says to Nozomi, like, I think she says this to Kumiko. It's like, I got the best read ever. Like, this is the best one. And she's like truly happy. It's almost like she's not even saying it to Kumiko. It's just like, oh my God, I got it finally. And I love that feeling. That's awesome.
Yeah, she goes in for like the world's most awkward fist bump ever, because she like has seen other people fist bumping, and she's like, I want to do that, but she doesn't really know how to do it. But yeah, with like Mizore, like one of the things, just to expand on the kind of neurodivergent element here, I think the thing that they really capture is the way in which she is kind of oblivious to the drama and like the social entanglements that are going on in these clubs, right? That like, you have a comment from Yuka in one of the early episodes where Mizore, I think this is in episode 1, where she sees Reina and Kumiko, and she's like, who's that Reina girl? And she's like, what, have you missed the whole, the trumpet solo, that whole thing that happened? It's like, in Mizore, like, all of that went completely over her head. She was like not aware, right? From her perspective, it was just like I guess they're doing another audition, right? Like, she didn't see the drama there. And then it's the exact same thing that then happened in middle school, or not in middle school, sorry, that happened the previous year, when she was a first year or whatever, when all the students quit, where she had no idea what was going on with Nozomi, and that like all these like upperclassmen were kind of bullying them and refusing to practice, because Mizore was just like, oh, this is my routine. I just go over here, I do my practice, I do this thing, right? And so she's so kind of like locked into her regular routine and kind of takes this sort of very explicit relationship for granted, right? She has like, my friend is Nozomi. This is who my friend is. I put her in this category. And it's like the only person in her life really that's in that category. And so when the moment comes where she is told well after the fact, oh wait, no, Nozomi quit, and Mizore had completely missed that, right? That's the thing that like completely shakes her to her core, because she's confronted with her difference. She's confronted with the fact that she has completely missed this whole thing, and she's like doesn't know how to fix that or repair it. And again, like all of that stuff, the way it's written and played, like it gave me legitimate flashbacks to interactions I've had with students, because the nature of a lot of the classes I teach co-taught classes, which have lots of students that have specific accommodations. So I teach a lot of students who are on the spectrum. I have every single year I've taught. And it's like the scenes of her going and like cowering in the corner, away from everybody else, like all that kind of stuff. It like really hit me very hard because it feels so truthful to the experience of someone like this who has such a hard time seeing the social dynamics and interacting with those social dynamics, and not knowing how to fix it once something has gone wrong, and just sort of trudging along. Like she's just sort of sticking to her routine, even if the routine no longer really makes sense to her. It's the only thing she has. As she says, thinking like the big climactic episode 4, the big climactic episode of that relationship, that this oboe is the only thing that's connecting her to Nozomi anymore. So she's just sticking with it kind of no matter what. It's all just a very touching, very beautiful portrait of a character like this.
Absolutely. And then you have Nozomi on the other side, who is a very different character, but also feels real in, I think, a very different way. But like as the kind of person who would befriend Mizore and be very genuine about it, but then also misunderstand sort of the nature of that relationship in a way that is not intentionally cruel in any way. I feel like they nail the reality of both sides of that relationship with this character.
Yeah, where for Mizore, Nozomi is her only friend in the whole school. That's the only person she recognizes as being a friend, right? Even though Yuko clearly is her friend, because Mizore can't read those interactions. She's just like, no, Yuko she's a band girl. She's one of like the people who's with me because we're in band together. Nozomi was like her friend, right? And so she classifies people in that way and has a hard time changing those classifications. But for Nozomi has a ton of friends. She has all these people, right? She's very outgoing, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I love her character. I love this whole like kind of arc around her needing this approval from Asuka to join the club, even though obviously that's not literally a thing she needs to have. She feels personally, right? She's just this kind of very honest, upstanding person. That's a very hardworking person that really kind of needs that approval. And it makes sense that she would have been one of the people that, kind of the straw broke the camel's back last year and would have quit the club because it was just too much. She tried so hard to try to right the ship, and there's just nothing she could do. And then eventually she just walked away from the whole thing. I think it's like feels very realistic. The character is voiced by Toyama Now, who I love this voice actress. She's in a bunch of great stuff. She was Toge in Nisekoi, which is one of the now it's kind of an old show, honestly speaking, but back in the day, it was one of like the big harem comedy romance shows. She was Yui in My Romantic Teen Comedy Snafu. She's Karen in Kyoto Mosaic, which is just one of my personal favorites. And then also recently, she's Kimberly in Street Fighter 6, if you play with the Japanese dub, which is fun. And another fun little trivia is both her and Tanizaki, who voices Mizore, they are both in Kimetsu no Yaiba as the sound Hashiras, two of his wives. Toyama Now is the one that's like the big goofy one. But he has his 3 wives, and 2 of them are these 2 voice actresses, which is like a fun little thing. But it's a great performance. It's also an interesting performance because Toyama Now is usually cast as like idiots. Like that's a lot of the characters she plays, like her character in Kimetsu no Yaiba. She does have this very sort of bright, cheerful voice that can also sound a bit kind of goofy. But I like her casting here that they capture that very bright, energetic quality to her voice, but there's also a little bit more of an edge there, right? This is a character who's been through a lot of stuff and feels very strongly and passionately about what's going on and is hit this sort of impossible impasse.
Yes. She's also our first flautist who is a major character in the show.
Yes.
We've had we've seen the flute section, but we've never really had a main character over there. And I think it is cool to have just expand the bench of what kind of instruments we're looking at too, with the flute and the oboe, which of course we'll see more of in Liz and the Bluebird, which I'm looking forward to because I like both of those instruments an awful lot. And yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic. And I think Nozomi also, again, sometimes I do think the tone of this strays a little bit towards like everyone being a little overly miserable for my taste, but I do like, particularly in this early stretch, that Nozomi, even when she is kind of bearing the weight of the world on her shoulders, or she feels like that, she's a very light, fun character to have around. And I think when you see, her and Mizore, the like resolution to their story and Mizore kind of coming out of her shell again. I like how much you feel that that is a friendship with history and with weight behind it, and you can really tell that there is something, you know, that really matters there to both of them, that I think makes you understand the idea of Mizore kind of having the yips with her oboe, of where she can play it, but she's not, like, the passion is not there. It's flat. And when it comes back, it is real. And I like that entire theme an awful lot.
Yeah, I think they really execute on that core idea so perfectly, because I think it would be very easy to make Mizore's like issue feel almost silly, because it isn't a big deal, really, right? Like
Right.
from like a more like kind of removed perspective, you look at, oh, your person who was your buddy didn't tell you when she was quitting the band. Like, that doesn't feel like that should be a huge issue, and it's something that should be very easy to resolve or overcome, but not for them, right? They're kids, and they're kids that have very particular problems. And most of the shit that goes on this season is stuff that, like, should not be a big problem. But as a person who teaches teenagers, let me tell you, things that shouldn't be big problems become world-ending affairs that their whole lives are staked upon. You're like, if you fucking wait a week, this is all going to be fine, and it's just going to blow over, and it's not going to be a problem, and they're fucking crying in your office. Well, if I had an office in my room. I wish I had a nice office, or a big, like, faculty office room like these people with cool cables coming down from the ceiling. Look like you're in, like, a fucking Blade Runner movie or something.
Teachers don't get that anymore in America, Sean. They did once upon a time when we were little kids. Some of our teachers had offices, but not by the time we left high school.
Yes, I'm just sitting in the corner at my desk eating a sandwich in my little 20 minutes I have to eat food. But yeah, like,
Yeah.
I think the way that they sort of design the drama, to me, it just feels so real. It feels so real for these characters. You see their perspective, and you understand why, for Mizore, why this is this thing she just cannot get over, something that makes her physically sick to try to, like, deal with, because it is that for her. It doesn't matter that for someone else it wouldn't be a big problem. Like, if Nozomi had this issue, she would resolve it in half a second. It wouldn't even occur to her as being a big problem, just like a weird thing that happened. Why didn't this person I thought was my friend tell me this thing? For Mizore, it's a thing that she just can't resolve, and she needs the support of all these other people to help her get through it.
There is the scene at the end of episode 4 where they are in the classroom, and I think is it Nozomi, Mizore, and Nozomi? There's the moment where she pulls Mizore. Mizore is down on the ground, and she pulls her up past the threshold of where the sun breaks over the desk and literally pulls her into the light. That scene is so fucking good that the highest praise I can give Ogawa Taichi here is that I knew around here we had a Kigami Yoshiji episode, and I saw that scene and went, this must be the Kigami Yoshiji episode, because holy shit, that's a phenomenal piece of staging and, like, animation. And no, Ogawa Taichi, maybe I was underestimating that person, because that is a phenomenal piece of storyboarding and animation.
Yeah. Like I said, I feel like this season for KyoAni is a big season of growth.
Yeah.
Like, so that's one of the episodes I didn't take screenshots of, mostly because it's like I took screenshots of almost every single episode, because they are all so fucking well done that it was hard to pick, like, here's, like, the really good episode I'm going to do some screenshots for. Because, yeah, like, all of these directors, even longtime ones like Ishidate Taichi, I think are just really pushing themselves and doing such incredible work. And Ogawa, like, he's the guy he's going to be like, replacement's the wrong word, but he's going to sort of step into Yamada Naoka's shoes in season 3, because he's the assistant director or whatever. It's a different title, but it seems like a similar kind of role that Yamada Naoko had on these 2 seasons now that she's not at KyoAni. And I think when you see that episode, you can see why there's so many good shots. There's, like, because before that moment, there is this great little shot of Mizore as she kind of, like, peeks her head up over that desk. Like,
Yes.
that whole scene in that classroom and how he uses the geometry of the whole thing, and this little lectern in the corner that she's hiding under, that Kumiko goes and finds her, and then her, like, poking her head up and then getting pulled out, as you say, into the sunlight. As Nozomi is sort of, like, mortified to realize how much she hurt this person she really cares about in a way she's totally ignorant of, which again feels so real to me about interactions between students in that way, that she just didn't even see it. She had no idea that this was a problem. She's just like, oh, we're buddies. Like, yeah, I haven't hung out with her in a while, but she's super busy with band. That makes sense. But when you look at it from the other side, it is like hellfire, basically. You know, it is this like frozen landscape or whatever. Their relationship is doomed. And all it takes is like a little conversation and reaching out for this person to sort of bridge that gap.
Yes, thaw the cold ice field in your metaphor,
Yes.
as you say, with the warm light of the sun. No, it's beautiful. And yeah, I think that fourth episode is fantastic. No notes on that fourth episode. If I felt any slowdown, it's more in the second and third episode, although there's very good stuff in those as well. We're also getting here some of the stuff with Taki-sensei, but maybe we should save that for later, because his arc kind of goes through the whole season and kind of touches a little bit of everyone's story.
Yes, there is a character that's introduced in episode 1. He's got some stuff early on that is, he's not a huge part of the season, but he's one of my favorite parts of the season, and that's Hashimoto Sensei, the percussion coach, who's voiced by a classic KyoAni actor at this point, Nakamura Yuichi. Who, of course, in terms of KyoAni stuff, we saw as Okazaki, the main character in Clannad. He was also Oriki, my soul brother, the main character in Hyoka. I gotta say, the last, 3 months of my this school year, I really realized how similar I am to Oriki and some things I did to try to avoid having to do additional work or interact with people I didn't want to interact with. And there's a lot of scheming I did to, avoid some shit. I'm like, oh my god, I am just this character from that anime. Oh my god. And we will see Nakamura again in Kobayashi's Maid Dragon, where he plays one of the main characters in that series as well. And of course, he is in a billion things. Probably most notably for us, he is also Mr. Bushido or Graham Acre in Double O Gundam. But just all-time great actor. Obviously, this is a very small role, but he just fucking takes hold of this role and makes everything out of it that he can. I adore this character. I adore his fucking outfits. Like, every time he comes in, he's got green socks and fucking sandals on. He's usually got a Hawaiian shirt that's undone with a little shirt underneath it. He's usually got a whistle or some sort of necklace around his neck. I like that he's 6 inches shorter than Taki-sensei, and so them next to each other, he's this little kind of stout guy. And he's just this ray of sunshine. He's this super energetic, super enthusiastic guy. I think we've all had teachers like this. I know teachers like this. And I just love this guy and the whole energy he brings. He's got a real honesty to the way that he tries to instruct people, but he is legitimately very funny and enthusiastic. And one of my favorite little tiny threads in the show is his relationship with Knuckle, the guy who's the head of the percussion group. And he's giving him compliments of hey, you felt that? Yeah, it felt a little bit better when you rode the cymbals this way, or whatever he says, or whatever percussion shit he says. And Knuckles yeah, I feel it. And then when Hashimoto later says oh, they're gonna stop being regular coaches, Knuckles starts crying at his drum set. It's I love the little relationship between our drum dudes.
Yes, no, it's great. Hashimoto particularly feels real as a percussion teacher. There's something so perfect about that. And I also think he is a really vital character in bringing out the other side of Taki-sensei we see this season, which is that, this season gets into a little bit more of Taki isn't that much older than the kids. He isn't, he's a relatively new teacher. He's maybe 30, and he has lived a life, but he's also been stuck a little bit in, we learned the death of his wife and that stuff, and these experiences aren't that far in his past. And so the idea that we start to see, because he brings in this person and the other, the woman who's the other coach, Niyama sensei, and they're his friends from his old friend group, right? And I think getting that sense of Taki-sensei was probably a fairly different person at some point. He is as quiet as he is, in part because of the death of his wife and growing up and some of these things. But Hashimoto is this connection to, when you see the two of them next to each other, it initially seems crazy until you realize Taki is putting up with, this kind of person he doesn't normally seem like he would have in his classroom, and you realize that they must be more similar than they are. And I think that's good, because we never really... But not never really. We never do get inside Taki-sensei's subjectivity in this show. We really always do see him from the kid's perspective. And I think having a character like Hashimoto on the side does so much to help understand the psychology of that character. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it really fleshes out Taki. It also just gives you I think while the band stuff in terms of practice is not as big of a focus in this season as it was last season for, totally understandable reasons. But it just like it's not as big of a thing, but it still is obviously important for the central identity of the show. It helps bring a lot of fresh energy into that whole section of the show, that you get to have these practice scenes and it gives you a different way to do them, that you don't just have Taki Sensei go, what is this? Like, what are you guys doing? And just be angry about it, or him being very complimentary or whatever. He gives such a different energy. And then you have Niyama Sensei, who's in charge of the woodwinds, who she is also a Clannad alum, because she is voiced by Kawashima Hoko, who was, God, what's her name? Tomoyo in Clannad. Also, she is the woman who did double roles in Gundam Seed as Flay and Natarla, which is still, every time I think about it, is fucking insane, because they're just completely opposite characters. It never makes sense why they would cast the same person, but she just pulled it off. But yeah, like, Niyama is not as interesting a character. She doesn't have as much screen time, but she is another one of Taki Sensei's kind of college buddies. They're all in that picture he has on his desk, where the wife is always sort of the way that it's shot, where her, like, the light is going across her face, so you never quite can make out what she looked like. But you can see Hashimoto and Niyama there. And yeah, he's kind of bringing in these people he knew, who are all these sort of like young musicians and professional musicians in their own right, to help give him support in this kind of new venture of his life. And so even though you never get into his subjectivity, you don't focus on Taki Sensei a lot, the presence of those two characters kind of fleshes out and is so suggestive of his life, as to say that he probably was very different at a certain point. He had this whole relationship. He lost that whole relationship. He was lost as a person for a long time. And now these people are trying to help him put it all back together, which also gives context to things like he is at his desk, like falling asleep at night in the school and shit like that. Like, he's clearly like running himself dry because he's just throwing himself at the work. And even though you don't get a huge amount with it, I think they do tell a good story with him, with these little elements along the edges.
I think they tell a beautiful story. And yeah, he feels like he has nowhere else to go. This is what has become like his life's purpose. But I also like the reaction of Hashimoto and Niyama. You can tell when they're like called in, they're very relieved that their buddy is in the world again, right? Uh-huh. Like, they're super supportive of him because they're like, we don't want this to like fall off the rails. Like, clearly he was in a dark place for a while, and understandably so. That's a horrible, horrible thing to have to go through at any age, but especially, that would have upended the whole course of his life. And yeah, the whole, just while we're talking about Taki Sensei, might as well just say it. When we get the revelation, I think it's the episode in the rain. That's like episode, what is that, 7 or 8?
6. I believe.
It's episode 6. Yes, it is episode 6. Okay, that's one of the Kawanami Eisaku episodes. And yeah, she has the argument. Kumiko has the argument with her sister, and then sees Taki Sensei at the flower shop. And Taki Sensei gives her the ride home because her umbrella breaks in the typhoon. And when we realize that those flowers are the flowers his wife loved, and like symbolized her desire to take a team to nationals, and then he's not going and putting those flowers on her grave, he's taking them to the school and leaving them out front. That's like one of the most romantic things I've ever seen in an anime. It's like stunning, and it's beautiful, and it's sad and wonderful.
Well, yeah, because what the flowers symbolize in Hanakotoba, which they have to, I've never actually seen that be translated before, and it was like floriography or something, which
yes.
I was like, oh, I guess that's a word. I've never heard that be tried to like said in English as just a single word before. But it means like, I'm always thinking of you. So yeah, there's the flowers growing in front of the school. He does, I think the implication is actually that those specific flowers he takes to her grave, because you see those flowers at her grave in episode 11 when we see that. But they are also growing in front of the school and all that kind of stuff. But yes, it is they
are also the first image in the theme song this season. And so there's a lot of that kind of good foreshadowing of things that are coming up throughout the show. And yeah, it's really, really lovely.
Yeah,
but
amazing.
While we're talking, okay, so we got through kind of the first 4 episodes of that first arc. Can we talk about episode 5? Oh my god, episode 5.
Okay, yes. Let's talk about episode 5.
Episode 5. This is the end of, I mean, we're kind of past the whole Nozomi Mizore thing, but this is where we get the Kansai competition, and this is the one that is directed by Kigami Yoshiji, and it is storyboarded by him and by Tatsuya Ishihara. I am fairly confident Tatsuya Ishihara storyboarded the first half of this, because it feels like the most Tatsuya Ishihara like perfect high school imagery, getting all of that experiential detail, like the big picture Tatsuya Ishihara. And then I think the second half, because basically the entire part B of this episode is just the performance. It is wordless. It's the whole thing.
And it isn't even like it's more than the second half. It's really the second 2/3, because when I went to do the screenshots, I double checked, and the A part is basically 7 minutes long.
Yeah.
So the bulk of the episode is just the performance. It's kind of staggering how long the performance is, which you don't even realize, I think, in the moment when you're watching it, because you're just entranced. But it's the vast majority of that episode.
And that feels to me like the most Kigami thing that Kigami has ever done. It is unbelievable. I would argue that the Kansai performance in episode 5 is the most spectacular thing we have watched all season. If I'm picking one sequence to pick, like, this is the most spectacular piece of animation Kyoto Animation has produced, I think it is that sequence. I think in terms of the raw animation, yes, but also the storyboarding and the pure visual storytelling. And this is the Kigami touch. There is no dialogue in the back half of that episode. It is just the performance. And it has to communicate to us that, and we have heard them play this song before. We've heard them play it several times before. We have seen a full, detailed, beautiful piece of animation doing this in the previous season. And what it communicates in showing that they are better, they are at their peak, they are sort of on fire as a group. And it does that just through the music, just through the animation. And then as soon as it is done, like Taki Sensei comes down on the downbeat of finishing the song, cut. End of episode, go to credits. What a fucking mic drop. We do get the results as a post-credits scene, but it is like jaw on the floor. Oh my God. And I would bet all my money that it is Yoshiji Kigami himself drawing Taki Sensei's conducting. The sheer nuance of the physicality of that guy's hands, because Taki Sensei does not conduct with a baton, he conducts with his hands, which is an even kind of more complex thing to animate. The studied way the hands move, it reminds me of the final scene of A Silent Voice. It looks so much like a Kigami piece of animation, but holy crap, Sean, this scene.
Yeah, it's incredible. And honestly, like when I went back for my screenshots, I just kind of gave up on doing a comprehensive screenshots, because it would have been like 500 or something, because there are so many cuts, and every single cut is so gorgeous and full of detail and communicates something. Where this is where the work we talked about in season 1, of where Ikeda Shoko, the character designer, went in and she did unique character designs for every single member of the band, and including like notes and ideas on what are the things that make these people a little bit different than everyone else. And we talked about how cool that is for the big like sort of crowd scenes and stuff, that it really makes it feel like this is a band full of unique people, not just here's the 5 main characters who look like main characters and then everybody else is just like a faceless blob, which is what most anime do for totally understandable reasons. That would not work for Sound Euphonium, because that's not what a band is. A band is everybody who is all the individual in their own right and an individual musician in their own right coming together as an ensemble to create something unique. That like work they did in season 1, it all culminates and pays off here, because like you don't honestly, like the minority of the shots are the ones with the main characters. Like there are shots of the main characters and they're nice, and you like see Sapphire playing her upright bass, and you see the club president and she's on her saxophone and all that kind of stuff. You get those moments with the main characters, but most shots are here's all of the other people, every single section. Like I believe, as far as I could tell, every single instrument in the band is represented multiple times throughout the entire performance. And I bet if you sat down and you looked at all of the eye catches from season 1, which when you put them all together assembles the entire band because it's every single section of music, I bet if you looked at that and you looked at this sequence, you could probably identify every single person in the band here, and all of them get big close-ups that are really gorgeous and beautifully animated. Whatever instrument they're playing, if they're on the percussion, if they're on the flute, if obviously you've got like Mizore on the oboe, the fucking trombones, your tuba people, right? Everybody is represented with the same level of care in terms of the direction in the animation. And that is part of the thing that makes it stunning, because that's just this whole other level of work. Because it's you're having to draw so many different people playing so many complex objects all of which are played in different ways, most of which involve like very complex finger movements and stuff like that. And having to do that over the course of like a 10-minute long performance of this piece of music, it is incredible. It is absolutely jaw-dropping. And you had kind of you had seen this episode before I did, and you kind of tried to talk to me about it the last time we recorded a podcast. I'm like, oh no, I haven't seen that one yet, because it was like the next one I was going to see. And so I watched it that night, and even knowing that you were like, oh, it's something special, my mind was still blown by this whole thing. Like, it's insane.
It is the best piece of like representation of a musical performance I've ever seen in a fictional, like, dramatized piece of media. Again, you have to take like concert films and documentaries are a different kind of thing. And there's stuff like, like Purple Rain that is actually Prince playing, but it's a fictional like story. So put that kind of stuff aside. But like where you are having it is a completely fictional from the ground up representation of musical performance, I don't think there's anything that compares to this. It's unbelievable. And it's not just that it is also accurate and every instrument looks perfect and everything you were just describing, Sean. It is also that there is a story being told. It is a piece of visual storytelling. You could put it on mute and not even hear the piece of music they're playing, and you would get a really powerful sense of the group dynamics, of where everyone's mind is at, where they are feeling sort of an anxiety, where they are feeling, a real sense of a rush of excitement. Like that whole group dynamic, the idea that a band is it is a social organism. It is a big thing that becomes like a larger organism than just individual people. That is so represented in this sequence, and there's nothing else like it. It's out of this world. The one question I had, and this was not I don't like this thing, I love this detail, but I had a question of how realistic it is that all the characters have posted, they don't just have all their like notes on their sheet music, which is, of course, is very realistic, you would be noting that stuff up to hell, but they've posted a bunch of like pictures of like the band all over their sheet music, and they've got that there. And I did ask Thomas, is that a thing that like you do in concert band? And he said he had never done anything like that, and he couldn't quite imagine it. I said, are they like putting it over because they have the music memorized and they don't need the sheet music? And he said, at this level, you probably would effectively have it memorized, but you would never risk that. You would still have your notes in front of you. So he said he didn't know anything, and the people he talked to in Japan who had been in band didn't know anything about this detail. And so we both assumed that has to be something that they saw someone doing in their research for this episode. I just have to imagine someone in one of the bands that they researched for Sound Euphonium did something like this, because it feels like a detail you wouldn't just pull out of your ass. It feels like something that feels like a lived experience. It's just not one I'm familiar with.
Yes, yeah, because I also was curious about that, because it's also possible, depending on like what the instrument it is, that like it could just be over a section where they're not playing like that piece of it, right? Because like not every instrument is playing every section of the whole song, right? Especially if you're like, the girl on cymbals, who's maybe my favorite background character because she's fucking rad. And she just like really goes into those cymbals, and it looks great. I've like every single performance, they have one really killer shot of her smacking those cymbals together. But obviously for most of the performance, she's standing there counting rests, waiting on those cymbals. Like, eventually I'm gonna smack the shit out of this stuff. She probably plays another part of the percussion as well. But like percussionists, there are long sections where you're maybe not playing stuff, and you can have lots of a whole nice collage on your sheet music while you're waiting and counting your rests. But yeah, regardless of whether or not it's a thing that's actually done, it does feel lived in. But regardless, it also serves as such a great visual storytelling tool here, where you see like all the stuff from them taking their band camp together, and like all the teachers. My favorite one is this one little picture of you have a bunch of the girls, and they're the background characters. None of these are the main characters featured, and they're all doing this little like teapot pose, and there's one other girl in the background who's doing it but in the different like opposite direction. And that to me is the most like real, like that just looks like a picture that actual teenagers would have taken together as like a dumb we're goofing around at band camp. It's so great, and it also serves as a fuel for there's sections here where you get different kind of flashbacks to memories, with the most powerful one being when Reina comes in with her big trumpet solo. Kumiko starts hearing that, and she flashes back to the fireworks from episode 1 and then to the episode 8. And then I love that specifically she thinks of the moment where Reina runs her finger down Kumiko's face over her lips and then bounces the lip, and you like see the lip like bounce back and forth like it's actual flesh. It's such a like carnal detail of that little like piece of animation, and then it cuts to her playing her thing with those lips that she's remembering being caressed. Again, it's like, yes, there's not as much Reina stuff. There is still some very intense Reina stuff in the show in season 2. Then you also get stuff like the Mizore gets to play her little oboe solo, and Nozomi's hearing it in the back. I think my favorite shot in this whole sequence, though, is where you have the shot from Kumiko's POV, where she's looking out and she sees Taki-sensei, and you just get these sort of like vague blurred shapes, which are the crowd, and like these like, you know, spots of light, which to me, I've never played band, but I've been on stages before, and it's like that captures the feeling of being on a stage where there's all these big lights and you can't quite make out the crowd, and you're just kind of staring out there and you're giving your speech or whatever it is, and it's just into this like hazy void you're standing in. It's that kind of weird out-of-body surreal experience that I've never seen that be captured in imagery quite like that shot does.
I wanted to mention that shot too, because you're absolutely right, and I have been on a stage playing in the orchestra or in choir, and that feeling when because she gets on stage, she sits down, she's, you know, getting her euphonium ready, and she looks up and sees that, it sparked memories I didn't even know I still had. Like, it gets that feeling so perfectly, and this is a good example of where animation can do more than photography, because there's no photo that could ever capture that. Where, like, if you sat in Kumiko's spot and you took a photo of the lights and everything, you could get some of the experience, but it's not something that can be photographically captured. It is the experience of the lights kind of blowing out your vision, of the haziness of it, of the sense of kind of the auditorium kind of swallowing you up. Boy, it's incredible. And there's so many just little pieces like that in here. And, you know, back to that idea of the photos that they have on their music, part of the story being told here, and I think it contrasts with later in the season, is this is the peak of the Kitauji High School Band as we see them in these first 2 seasons, as a social unit, as a group of friends, as a group of people who work together really fluidly and flawlessly. And that is why their performance is so good. And one of the reasons I think there's a bunch of reasons why they don't do the performance again in episode 12. Part of it is, I think, simple repetition. Part of it is, I think, they want to do the performance in episode 13, where it is the smaller group playing for the third years, because that just has more emotional resonance. But I also think it's because they are not as cohesive at that moment. They've been through a bit of an emotional ringer, and that probably, you know, comes to bear. But it's something where they're not living quite in the moment the way they are in episode 5, where they are all living for this specific thing right here. This is the peak. And it conveys that idea so beautifully.
Yeah. And it also has to be said that the performance of the song itself is incredible. Like, again, as someone who certainly is far from an expert in this style of music, like, I don't know that much about concert band stuff. I do not play a concert band instrument. I did not participate in this stuff in high school. It's not the style of music I regularly listen to outside of the context of, like, a movie soundtrack or this soundtrack or stuff like that. But even for someone like me, it is so clear the difference, even though it is the same piece of music. And obviously that's part of the depth of any musical performance, but particularly something like that's as complicated as concert band that has so many different instruments and so many different performers, that there's so many nuances you can express, even if the music on the page is more or less the same. They maybe made like a tweak of, oh, let's have this instrument play this part here or something like that. And I'm sure if you did like a huge deep dive and compared this performance to the one from the end of season 1, you could really point out the specific differences. But there's just an emotional difference that is expressed in how the instruments are played that communicates all of that. And so it really has to be said that the musical performances are all by the same band group that did it, and like the same people who did it for season 1, and they continue to just sort of excel at not just playing the music, but playing the music to the story. And so that group and their conductor and all of that, like, it's crazy. Like, I don't think I would have even thought that you could have done it as well as this. You know, it's kind of like what we talked about with season 1. So often when you're watching fiction about music, you just have to kind of accept things that they're telling you in the story, even if your ears aren't actually hearing it. It's like, oh yes, well, because they say in the story this is the greatest performance ever, this must be the greatest performance ever. Clearly they should have won gold for this, even if I didn't actually like it that much and I thought, it sounded fine. Here it both is, oh my God, yeah, they should fucking win gold for this thing and go to nationals. But also you're like, they are so much better than they were in season 1. They sounded amazing season 1. I didn't realize they could be better than they were in season 1. And yet this performance, both musically and in terms of the way the animation communicates it, is just on this other level. As you say, this is the peak of what they hit, and I think it's clear that they never quite get back here again after the Asuka drama. So this is like the height of this year's band at Kitauji, and it's just amazing how much the music communicates that as well, and you don't have to just sort of accept it because the story's telling you. It's something that you actually emotionally feel watching and listening to the performance.
One of the things I felt watching the performance in episode 5 is that in season 1, it felt like Reina's solo was like the thing that made it super special, and the rest of the band was kind of supporting and building up to and undergirding that. And then in season 2, in this performance in episode 5, Reina's solo is just as lovely, but it doesn't feel as like stand out to the rest of the performance because the rest of the performance feels like it's up on par with her now. And so like there's a cohesion to that. And the animation emphasizes this too, because when Reina plays her solo, there's not as many shots of her as there were in season 1. And so it's all very, very smart stuff. And of course, while we're talking about all the names here, we should not forget Takahashi Hiroyuki, the musical instrument animation director, who I presume had their work cut out for them with this episode.
Yeah, because again, like I said, like there's a couple of shots that make me wonder if they are actually reusing shots from season 1 or they're very similar. Like if they did reuse some shots, like it would not be a problem. Like it's, there's only so many ways you could shoot a shot of someone playing a trumpet, and it turns out the coolest way to do it is to zoom in specifically on where their fingers are, because you have that shot with Reina. They had it in season 1. They have it here. They also have it in episode 13. If they literally reuse the animation, that's not a problem. Regardless, it's a similar shot. But even if they reuse some stuff, there are so many more big close-ups on every random instrument from all these different fucking angles that, yeah, it's like... It almost felt like it was like a dare or something of like, how many different ways can we try to draw these instruments, and how many different instruments can we draw in one scene? Because it's a lot. It almost feels like illegal or something. Like are you even allowed to do this? It's so crazy.
Yeah. So episode 5, I think we've given it its due. It is a all-timer.
Yeah, absolute all-timer. Before we move on to the second half, just a couple of other little things from episodes from these ones I want to point out. One, there's the scene at the end of episode 3, which kind of is the thing that sets up Asuka's arc, where Kumiko comes out after a long night of her not being able to sleep. Episode 3 is a great one, where this is the one where she goes around and talks to all these different characters about what does a competition mean to them. Ultimately then talking to Reina, and Reina's the one person to say, like, actually I like them, because you don't get many opportunities to get everybody to hear you play. And then Kumiko comes out and she's like, oh God, I didn't get a single bit of sleep that night. And then she hears Asuka playing the euphonium, and then comes up over this hill and sees her in this clearing, and she's playing the song we later will come to know is called Sound Euphonium, written for her by her father. But it's such a beautiful, like, weird, otherworldly moment, where you've had this really gorgeous episode that's so nicely structured around all these different conversations Kumiko has, ending with this weird ethereal moment of seeing Asuka from a distance playing this gorgeous song. So that's a scene I really wanted to shout out here.
Great scene, good stuff. Do we know who wrote the Sound Euphonium song? Is it the composer of the show? Is it someone else?
Oh, that's a good question.
I could look that up if you have other things you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think you look it up, because I thought I had it pulled up here, but I actually don't.
Yeah.
Yes, so let's see what other scenes I want to talk about here in this section. Episode 2 has a lot of really great stuff. You have this very long conversation between Kumiko and Nozomi at the pool, that is just a gorgeously shot sequence where they're sitting in the shade, talking about all the stuff going on with Mizore, and the way that they're using this huge empty space where you're using the light in the shade to communicate the separation between the two characters. The shot of Kumiko kind of standing up and walking out to the edge of the shade, and then this side profile shot with the huge blue sky and expanse behind her as she's shouting at Nozomi, trying to be like, hey, like, I will help you, like, I will find out what's going on here. That whole conversation I found very striking.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another very good one.
Did you find it yet?
It looks like it's by what's the name of the composer of the show?
Masuda.
It is. Yeah, it's Masuda Akito. It is him, and it's because I think it is also just part of the score. Like, it is part of the, there's leitmotifs from it throughout the score. So yes, it is just written by the show's composer. And I was also trying to see who was performing, because they have all the performers listed here on the soundtrack for season 2 as well. But I presume it's just whoever the college band that they work with had someone do it. But yeah.
Yes. Because
I was wondering, because it sounds so convincingly like something, like, because in the fiction of the show, it's written by Asuka's dad, who is a famous euphonium player and teacher and all of that, and it sounds like the kind of thing that person would write, which made me wonder if it was someone different, but it is Matsuda Akito.
Yeah, because there is also that scene where Reina and Kumiko are listening to that CD written by that guy, and you can hear the song that's being played there. It's not the same song, but it's very similar. And they do a good job of that, of like kind of seeding this reveal of that it's that guy is the guy who wrote the song that then is the one that Asuka's playing. But yes, it's a gorgeous piece of music. And as you say, leitmotifs in the soundtrack using that melody are all over the place, particularly in the second half.
Yes. All right. Was that all you had for this first batch of episodes?
I think so. The other thing is I like the little weird rhythm game that Mizore plays on her phone with the sound off, which is a great little moment. And then she pokes Kumiko in her ankle because she doesn't want her to play whatever it is on her phone.
Headphones, yeah. That's a good moment. All right. But then we already talked a little bit about episode 6, which is kind of our transitionary episode into that this arc. It's the Asuka arc, but it is also the Kumiko's older sister arc, the Mamiko arc. Because it is about her older sister who is leaving home, leaving college because she wants to become a beautician, but we are also learning that she has been chafing at her parents' demands for a long time, and part of why she seemed so resentful towards Kumiko in season 1 is because she had to leave the concert band but never really wanted to, which is why she acts like, she's too cool for it and doesn't like what Kumiko is doing. And so you have Kumiko dealing with this side of things while we are dealing with Asuka being pushed out of the band. And as you say earlier, this season is so much about Kumiko learning from, looking up to, learning about other women who are role models for her, who she kind of collapses into one. And I think that is probably my favorite thing thematically about what the second half of this season is doing, is how it is mirroring characters who never even meet. Mamiko and Asuka don't even know the other person exists, but they are very much mirrored in the text of the show and in Kumiko's mind.
Yes, well, there's that one episode here where it's the one where Kumiko gets sick. I don't remember which episode.
Rhapsody and Flu. It's the Kitanahara Noriyuki one, episode 8.
Okay, yeah. So this one, there's a really great sequence here where the midpoint of the episode, it's just like, it sort of is the part where it kind of fully puts this front and center, I think, where Kumiko is sick at home, and she has this sort of like memory she has of when she first starts playing the euphonium, because she's like kind of hazily looking at her line of CDs. She then remembers the teacher giving her the Tanoshi Euphonium, which is the text, like the starter textbook or whatever, written by the guy that we later learn is Asuka's dad, and then giving her the CD by that same guy, which is the kind of starter CD for euphonium player. And then she shows off to the class that she can make the noise or whatever with her lips that you need to be able to play these instruments. And the teacher's like, "Oh, that's amazing." She's like, "Yeah, my sister taught me. My sister's the most amazing person in the whole wide world." And she gives this big, adorable grin. She wakes up from that dream and she hazily looks over and sees a girl with black hair in their school uniform. And the way that sequence is shot, it's like she knows there's another person in the room. You think for the implication of the editing, it's going to be her sister because of the dream. But then the shot that they choose of her only kind of half seeing this girl in black hair with the uniform makes it look like it's Asuka. And then it pans up and it's Reina. And that's like such a great moment that shows like all three of these women kind of are the same person to her in different ways, right? Kumiko's sister is this person that she has always looked up to as a little sister, this someone who she loves and she wanted to be like when she got older and now has disappointed her. Reina is this girl that she's always looked up to as a musician, right? That like back in middle school, she's like, this girl is so amazing. She's such an incredible musician that also has this sort of like gumption to her that Kumiko feels like she lacks, so she looks up to that. But Asuka's like the fusion of these two people. Asuka is both this older woman who serves as a role model in that sense. She is also this incredibly talented musician who happens to play the same instrument that Kumiko plays, the euphonium. So I think like that moment to me was like this, kind of Rosetta Stone of locking in, oh, this is why Kumiko is so obsessive about Asuka. Because like Asuka is this person that kind of is all things to Kumiko. She represents all these different sides, both attacking her insecurities about her older sister, but also her insecurities as a musician through that like kind of same filter that Reina did in season 1 until she kind of bridged that gap. And then at the same time, Asuka is this impossible person. She's completely unapproachable. She lies. She manipulates people, right? And so that then like exacerbates the whole thing. But I love the way that, that scene in particular, but everything in the second half plays with Kumiko's relationship with these people and how it reflects on her and how she wants to be as a musician and as a human being.
Absolutely. One other funny note about the scene that you were just talking about, the little flashback, is in there where she gets the CD with the euphonium songs on it that she then shares with Reina later on. And we get a nice big close-up that says Euphonium by Masakazu Shindo. And I paused on that and I went, well, there's only two reasons they would show the name that prominently. Either that's a real CD or that is a fictional character we're going to see more of. And so I did Google the name. I went, is that like, can I go listen to that? Is that a real CD they put in the show? And then, so I had spoiled for me that person is Asuka's dad because that's the first Google result. But like, it would not have surprised me if that were a real euphonium player that they just put on there, because that's the kind of thing KyoAni would do in this show. Yeah. And I was slightly sad to learn I cannot go listen to the Euphonium Basic CD by Masakazu Shindo because it sounds like it would be very good. But no, you're so right about Asuka and about these three characters. And I think this goes back to something I was saying with season 1, which is that Asuka feels, in some ways Asuka is an extremely heightened character. Like she's one of the more heightened characters in this show and more theatrical characters in that sense. But she also feels so real to me. And I think it's the perceptual side of it. Like she feels like, I described this last time, people I knew when I was younger in orchestra, and there were my, senpai, we don't call them senpai in America, but the people a couple years up the ladder from you, and sometimes, like, they don't make sense to you. They feel very mysterious, and they also feel very mature. Like, that person must have all their shit together because they're really good at this. I don't ever see them practicing or trying that hard, but they seem like they really know what they're doing. Their grades are good, but they don't seem like they really care about their grades. And like that person is such a riddle. And I think if you just put all those character details down, it sounds ridiculous, except that I think we've all known someone like that. Asuka is such a contradiction. You never really see her working that hard at the euphonium, but she's really fucking good at it. You never see her like being all this crazy about her studies, but she is the valedictorian, we find out in the final episode, right? Like, she's kind of a genius. She's like some kind of wild thing. But what the Asuka arc is about is that she's a fucking kid who doesn't know anything. Like she is just as much of a kid as Kumiko is, and if anything, Kumiko is the more mature of the two of them. And that is kind of the journey for Kumiko here, is tearing down those walls that make her think Asuka is something other than what she is, which is a kid. Just a kid. Doesn't know what's going on, has some talent, but is as confused as everyone else. But because she's a little bit older and a little bit more mysterious, she can hide it better than others.
Absolutely, yes. It is very much a big part of the theme here. And then there's another big thing that happens here that you learn about Asuka that I think kind of helps put this character in context, which is she's a victim of abuse, right? So you have this moment, this like insane, as a teacher, an absolutely insane fucking thing happens. So in episode 7, which is one of the episodes from Fujita Haruka, this is the one where it basically opens with Asuka's mom coming to school, because you have episode 6 is sort of your like border episode between the two story arcs, and episode 6 ends with this great moment sort of teasing this woman is at the school, and Asuka, it's super ominous, and Asuka's like in the room practicing euphonium, and there's just intercut it with shots of this woman taking her fucking high heels off and putting them in the school like box or whatever. And so that kind of sets it up. And then episode 7, she's there. You have this crazy scene where Kumiko walks into the faculty office and sees this huge argument happening. And Asuka's mom is there, and she's demanding that Asuka quit the band. And Taki Sensei, to his credit, Because this would be especially for a new teacher, this would be a very hard thing to go, no, I'm not going to accept that.
It's my favorite moment of Taki Sensei as a teacher in this whole show, because he just sticks to his guns. He's like, absolutely not. I am not your teacher. I'm your kid's teacher. Yeah. My responsibility is not to you. And I like he is so clear-eyed about it. I love it.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. And then that causes what, from my perspective, of the teacher is like the equivalent of a thermonuclear bomb going off in the school, which is the mom fucking slaps her kid, slaps Asuka in the faculty office in a meeting with her teachers, and there are also students present, because it's not just Kumiko. There's like a couple of other students that are there waiting. They're clearly like, they have some business that they need to talk to someone, and like, this is a conversation that should not be happening in a big open office like this. I've never been to a Japanese high school. I have to assume that they have conference rooms you can go into, that like we have at schools I've worked at, where you would not
have empty classrooms at a minimum.
Yeah, you would not want to have this conversation in any context, even sans slap out in the open for other people to be able to hear, because this is all very privileged information to have access to. But the notion of a parent slapping their kid at the school, it's fucking wild. And I'd be very interested in hearing a Japanese high school teacher's perspective on what they do here, because to me, the one thing that seems just insane is that they let Asuka go home with her mom after that, where from my perspective as a teacher in America, that's like illegal. Like you can't.
That's called the cops, right?
Yes. This is, we're getting the school resource officer in here. We're getting the students counselor in here. And we are probably going to, depending on what the school resource officer decides, like take this up fully to the police. But as a teacher, that's like you have a law in America called the first responder law, where if you are a teacher, you are obligated legally that if you have credible evidence to lead you to believe that a student is being abused in some way, physically, sexually, or emotionally, that you have to report that. It's the first reporter law is the what it's called. And so you have to report that. If you do not, and this all comes out, and it is revealed that there is reason you had to believe that this abuse was happening, and you did not report it, you can go to fucking jail for that shit. And so that's a thing where I have only very rarely, it's only been twice that I've had to like actually act on something like that, where I've seen something a student has written that made me concerned, and I sort of like moved that up the chain to the counselors and stuff like that. And luckily nothing really big came out of those specific instances, but it's definitely something I know of other teachers that have like discovered clear evidence of abuse and have had to get involved in this whole process and all that kind of stuff, which again is ethically you should do, but is also you are legally obligated to do it. I have no idea how that works in Japan. But this is
there's
like
also differing like cultural norms around like corporal punishment with kids, and I don't know exactly what the like stance on that in Japan in the 2010s is, but that would all be playing into this as well.
But like if this happened, if I was in a conference with a parent, and also fucking one of the assistant principals is there, and that parent slaps their kid there in that conference meeting, that conference is over. That kid is not going home with that parent. We are bringing other people into this room, because that's like so beyond even the like first reporting thing. Like, 'cause it's not even like, oh, I found something that might imply that this student is disturbed or has been abused or something. It's like, I saw you hit your kid, lady. Like, this whole thing we're having a very different conversation all of a sudden. I think it makes, again, like I understand for the storytelling reasons. And again, I don't know in Japan how this would all like go down to this office, that they kind of let this go this other way where Asuka goes home with the mom. The mom also is like very clearly distraught over all of this. Not that that makes it any better really. But I think like at least like it feels like the mom's not going to start hitting Asuka as soon as she leaves the room. But regardless, like it is fucking wild, but it is also a thing that I think puts Asuka's character in such a clear context of, oh, of course she like kind of lies to people. She has this incredibly cynical outlook, right? Because this is a lot of her role in the first story arc of the season with Nozomi and Mizore, is she is incredibly insistent on not letting Nozomi rejoin the band. And she has this very cynical thing that she says at the end of episode 4, after the whole Mizore Nozomi thing has seemingly been resolved, where Kumiko's talking to Asuka about it, and Asuka says something to the effect of like, people are such kind of selfish beings, right? Like Mizore, like, you know, she had this whole thing with Nozomi, but she was also keeping Yuko on the side as like, you know, kind of like a safety net or something. And it's this very like kind of cold, cynical analysis of those relationships. And Kumiko pushes back on it, saying like, you probably shouldn't look at everything so cynically. But again, it puts Asuka's whole thing into perspective that she has had to learn survival strategies. She has a parent, her only parent that she's living with, who is someone that is willing to hit her, who is so emotionally unstable that physical violence is like a particular is a possible consequence, and who knows like what other kinds of possible negative consequences there are here that are so far outside what we consider the norm, that Asuka has had to learn how to deal with and manage that relationship and that person in her life. So of course she has all these survival strategies. Of course she keeps who she is and what she actually thinks and feels and believes like so deep under all these layers, right? Because obviously she also does not want anybody else to know or realize this is the kind of relationship she has with her mom. Like, this is a lot of how like you see these people in the real world and students in the real world interact and like act when these kinds of things come up, is they can be so incredibly guarded and closed down and shut down because it's something they've learned how to do, to spare themselves emotionally, spare themselves embarrassment, like potentially spare themselves from physical punishment. And I think it just reflects so much on, okay, this is like part of Asuka's whole life, and it puts her character in a very different context that makes you understand why one of the reasons why she is the way she is. Like, I don't want to boil her entire thing down to she is a victim of abuse, but you see how someone who is really brilliant like her and is so good at playing people and emotionally like kind of manipulating people, how she would have kind of taken this in this direction and gone down this road in her life. And it's so brutally sad and tragic because she's such a brilliant person that then this whole arc obviously starts sending her down this really, really dark path that Kumiko has to save her from.
Yeah. And, you know, when you talk about her being very cynical, it's cynical, but it takes this really, it's hard to recognize because it comes through in this very bubbly, fun attitude.
Yes.
Where she often says these cynical things in a mode where, like, she seems like the life of the party. She seems like the life of the band. It's why in season 1, no one can understand why she's not the president when your actual president is the more introverted, shy person who is the one who cries at the end of the season and all that stuff, right? But, like, Asuka has this sense inside of her that, no, I am the wrong person for this, but no one else understands why. And yeah, it is that sense that she has built up walls that prevent her from trusting anyone else, which is part of why she plays the part of this very extroverted, fun person, even though inside she is someone quite a bit darker. And I think the slap moment says a lot to that. I'm glad to hear all your thoughts on this, Sean, because I did get through episode 7 and I went, boy, I think Sean's going to have some things to say about that. I'm really curious, like, what would Sean's reaction be if he were in that meeting? Because at first that scene starts with me going like, Taki-sensei, yeah, you're being a great teacher here. And I think Taki, you even get inside, he's like, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm standing up to the parent. And then the parent says like, fuck, this day got worse. I thought I was doing a good job. Now what do I do? Because that just must suck.
Yeah, because like the reality is when you have like a really angry parent that's shouting at you, like there's like no good way to respond to that. Like in my experience, there's no way to sort of like make that right. Like you have something has gone wrong already to get to the point.
Yes.
This is literally what I was implying when I talked about the Oriki thing a little bit earlier. I've realized how similar I am to him, where it's like I saw some like smoke. I saw some like shit, like things could go a certain way, and it's like I tried to like I sent some very well-timed emails and had some conversations like I want to avoid this from happening because if it gets to this point, it is hell. It is just your life for like weeks on end. And there is another teacher who is a new teacher. He's older than me, but he kind of came to teaching pretty late in life, and he's very good at it. That's where he got my school with me. But man, he is so bad at fucking avoiding these things, and he's just was constantly embroiled in bullshit with parents, and it's like it made me realize all the little things I do to try to keep that from happening, because it's like the thing is to keep this from happening as desperately as you can. Obviously, there are not always times to avoid it, but once you're in that meeting, man, it's just impossible. And so I really respect what Taki does in holding his ground, because that's hard. Like, that's really hard to do. And it's understandable why the assistant principal is there being like, oh, maybe you should maybe have a bit more tact. Like, maybe we could word this a little bit softer. Because, you know, he holds his ground, but he also does it in such a way that definitely, like, pushes back on the mom and, like, makes the situation even more extreme. But
also the mom ambushed him. This was, yes. There was nothing Taki could have done to, like, avoid the confrontation, because it comes out of the blue. So.
Yeah, it's just it's just one of those where I really feel for my man here. Like, I feel for him. Like, because you got this shit, you have him falling asleep at his fucking desk and students walking in and seeing him, which, like, God, that's hell. I can't imagine how embarrassing that would fucking feel. It's like Taki's going through a lot of stuff, and he's doing his best. He has the right attitude. Like, it's very much what I think, where, from, like, the way I see it is, like, your students are your boss. Like, that's the person you're serving, and that's the person that, like, your whole job is about them. It is not about the principal. It is not about their parents. Hopefully those are all things that can also come in and help the student. But at the end of the day, from my perspective as a teacher, your job is to help that student. They are the person who's in charge of you, really. And that's what it's all about. And so if this happens, like, I would like to think that I would be able to stand my ground like him here, because it is completely out of pocket. It is absolutely wrong. It's fucked up what the mom's trying to get Asuka to do here without her permission. Clearly, so much so that she has to resort to physical violence in order to try to get what the mom wants. No, he should not accept that club resignation.
Yes. So yes, that's all in episode 7. Episode 8 is the Kitanohara Noriyuki episode, which, hey, they had an episode about Kumiko getting sick and having to go home and be in this kind of liminal state. Of course, they got Kitanohara Noriyuki for that one. That had his name all over it, and it is a very good episode. But we really kind of, I think, went through the major points of that one. Was there anything else you wanted to mention from that one?
The ending of that episode is incredible, where you have Shuichi does the only good thing he's done in 2 seasons of the show, where he has a little heart-to-heart with Mamiko. And he says, like, maybe you should listen to us play. And then Mamiko has, Kumiko's older sister, has this memory where you see all these shots from her POV now, where we've had a lot of sequences either from a detached POV or from Kumiko's POV looking at her sister. And now you have the kind of reverse of her remembering all these times that Kumiko has kind of come into her room asking to play together. And this memory where you get a POV shot from Mamiko playing the trombone. And you see them together on this bench, like on the riverside when Mamiko was in high school. And then it cuts to her being there at night, sitting on that bench. And this great shot then of her coming home and opening up the door and her shadow kind of coming into the room and her asking Kumiko for a CD for performance. I just think the ending of that episode, it's so emotionally touching to me.
Well, and it's and the interplay between past and present and all of the memories, I found that really again, I always find the Kitanohara Noriyuki episode striking. This one, I think, the way we learn about all of Kumiko's feelings about her sister, which had been very bottled up in the first season. The sister is kind of a big question mark in that season of, like, what, there's something fraught there, but the nature of it is unclear to us. And then, and I think in the first season, it almost plays like, the older sister is just in that phase of teenagehood where she's just not very nice to the younger sister or the parents, and that happens. But, like, we get a much finer point on it here, and I think doing it through Kumiko's memories, and that it is this thing that kind of dynamically interplays with her present, it's perfect, and it is the kind of thing that's the kind of thing Kitanohara Noriyuki fucking excels at, and does so here. Episode 9, which is the Big Ishidate Taichi episode, and I know you have a lot to say about this one, Sean. I think we all do. It's you said it, and my brother Thomas said it, that it is the episode 8 of season 2, because it's the one that ends with somebody playing their instrument beautifully outside as the end credits roll, and your heart is in tatters. It's a little different in a lot of other ways. This one, though, I had not been checking all the directorial credits, and there is a long scene, like in it's the whole scene where they are at Asuka's house, and there are these repeating shots of going to the clock on her wall to show you kind of the passage of time, where I went, oh wait, is this the Kitano Hara Noriyuki one? Because that is such one of like his techniques. But like this episode does throw you for a little bit of a loop with Ishidate Taichi, because it's not the kind of episode I think prior we would have quite thought of him before, and it's where you do see just a lot of directorial growth. And I think, you know, I have not seen Violet Evergarden yet, but when you say, Sean, this feels like a transitionary point of the person who will go direct that show, I know what that show's about. I see what you mean. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, because like the whole thing with Violet Evergarden is it is about trying to communicate what the feeling of love is, and Violet is this person who writes letters for people to try to communicate the things that they can't say themselves. And so it's this very sort of like, you know, mushy human drama kind of thing. It's a great show. I'm very excited we're going to get to it in the not too distant future now. We're getting shockingly close. Violet Evergarden seemed like the thing that was like way distantly on the horizon. We're not that far away from covering it now, which is exciting. But yeah, it has been a thing where, you know, we've talked a lot about Ishidate Taichi in reference to action, because that's so much of where he kind of came from. When you look at his big episodes in the first few shows we covered, right, in Haruhi, he has the huge action episode there with Yuki fighting Asakura, which is like such a great, crazy, insane scene. He has the big action episode in Kanon with the girl who's the one who fights the invisible monsters or whatever in the school. And then obviously, like, throughout the other episodes, like, he typically was the guy that if there was a big action-focused thing, he would be the one to get that episode. He had the series Insutsu credit on Nichijou, which, even though it's a comedy, is a weirdly action-focused comedy. Like, it's got the most incredible action KyoAni has.
I might even downplay the word action and just say kinetic. He's very kinetic about like heavy amounts of motion and that sort of thing. And that's obviously what Nichijou is. Even when it's not literal action, that is like the most kinetic show ever made.
Yeah. And so then it makes sense then that he directed Beyond the Boundary, in the sense that it is a show that is very fixated on these action scenes that are extremely kinetic. It is the most striking thing about that show. The problem with that show is like all the human character stuff that exists around it, and weird glasses fetish and all that kind of shit that's in that show. But if all that show was like a series of music videos with this gorgeous animation, it would be fucking amazing. The fact that it has to tell this other story around it is where it really falters. And so it, you know, like Beyond the Boundaries is this kind of disappointing thing coming from this director who's made all these really good episodes, but they're episodes, as you say, that are very kinetic. And this is one where it felt like, oh man, his style feels like it has like slowly evolved, where, you know, obviously he can still do the kinetic stuff. There's stuff like that in Violet Evergarden, but also he has just such interesting shot choices. Like, there are multiple scenes here that I think just like every single shot is just absolute fucking lightning. Even just like little moments, like you have this little scene on the train after Reina has her weird little Taki Sensei moment with the keys and all this stuff, and she's sitting there after she's seen the picture, and she is looking up at the little rings or whatever on the train that are where you hold to put your hands, and you have this quiet moment of her looking up at that. And then you cut to Kumiko, and Kumiko's looking up at it, and they're not really talking, and it's just them looking up at these two circles, basically, suspended. And it's just, like, geometrically, I think it's a very interesting shot, and, like, this choice of them quietly staring at this thing. But the big moment that really took my breath away before you even get to the end is there's this really weird but fascinating interaction where on the way home with Asuka, where Kumiko's going with Asuka to her house, Kaori runs in and stops them because she's going to give them, this is the stupidest fucking idea in the world, but I love it because it makes sense. A student will come up with this. He's like, oh, I've got these like snacks that I know are Asuka's favorite snack that I bought from like the shop by the train. I'm going to go give this, and this will help smooth it over. No, that would not help smooth it over. I don't think a mom who slaps her kid is going to be convinced by some treats. But again, it's something that this kid does. So she gives this, the bag to Kumiko, and then Asuka, who had just been talking about like these cute new sneakers she has, Kaori like looks over and says, oh, your sneakers are untied. And she bends down to go tie the sneakers. Yes. You have the shot that sees Kumiko look down. You have the shot of Kaori, and it's just like her, you kind of just see her legs as she's bent down. You then have a shot looking through the bars of this like a gate or something, where you kind of just see the legs and kind of the bottom halves of these characters. They're mostly cut off, and they're like behind these bars. You then have this really ominous shot that's from like behind Kaori's head, looking forward, where Asuka towers up in the middle of the frame and she's completely in shadow and you can't see her expression through the shadow. You then have a shot of Kumiko turning and looking with this weird kind of unsettled look on her face, a shot of Kaori tying the last ends of the shoestrings, a shot of just the bottom half of Asuka's head, again with her expression occluded and in shadow, a super tight close-up on Kumiko's eye with a single dot of sweat going down, and then Kaori stands up. You have a totally normal-looking regular shot of three characters. It's kind of a, the shot you've seen a million times in anime like this, and they're just kind of chatting about it. Then you have a close-up then on Kumiko where Asuka's in the foreground of the frame, out of focus, and again, the top half of her head is in shadow and cut off. And then you have a shot of her turning and looking at Kumiko, and Asuka's totally normal. And is this super intense, like in everything I just described, that's like, it happens in like 5 seconds. There's a lot of really quick, fast edits. It's so intense. It's so ominous. It's so incredibly unsettling, and nothing happens from it. But it communicates so much. Where again, this is to me, if you're reading this as Asuka is, she's a victim of abuse, which is just literally true. But how intensely you can read that depends on who you are. But for me, this reads like I've had students who are victims of abuse, and they are so sensitive about their personal space for obviously very understandable reasons. And this moment where Kaori just kind of bends down and kind of gets in that personal bubble and touches these shoes that Asuka was just talking about, how much she likes these cute sneakers she got. Nothing happens from it. Asuka doesn't blow up. Like, it's fine, but it communicates some sort of like this energy where there's something in Asuka, and Kumiko barely kinds of sees it, where if like something went just a little wrong, like a certain button was pushed, like a boundary was overstepped. Like, this is the thing where, like, at my school, like, I've seen fucking fights start seemingly out of nowhere, but it's not out of nowhere. It's because a student got into another student's personal space, totally not knowing or realizing what this other student is, who they are, what they've experienced. They accidentally stepped over a line, and fucking fists are flying. And it's this weird little moment that almost feels inexplicable, but it communicates so much about Asuka's character and the energy and what's going on inside that, and how Kumiko is starting to be able to perceive a little bit of just how tumultuous Asuka's inner world really is.
I'm really glad you're talking about this scene in so much depth, because it was on my list too, as was the earlier scene on the train. I think we're picking up on the same things in this episode. But yeah, when you look at that, those, like, you have the screenshots here that we're looking at, and that the progression of images in isolation, it looks like a scene from like Demon Slayer. She's about to fucking transform and bite, Kaori's head off or something. Like, it's that kind of intense, and it is also unknowable. Like, Asuka becomes suddenly completely inscrutable, but then is able to snap back into it. And, this episode is so much about that kind of distance between who she is underneath and the mask she has on top. There's also, a lot of images that are of reflections in this episode. We didn't talk about in the earlier stretch, where people are like literally talking, through windows or in their reflections and things like that. And so that kind of duality or doubling, or their shadow selves, there's a lot of shots of shadows in this episode, is all part of the subtext that is here visually.
Yeah. And then you have all the stuff where you have the scene at Asuka's house, which you were kind of pointing out earlier, where you get these recurring shots of the clock. This is also one of the places where, like, the use of color in Kyoto is always phenomenal. It's particularly good in this show, where there's like just this particular slow shift from this like late afternoon kind of color palette that's very kind of yellow green, and then slowly the oranges and the reds start to come in as it gets closer to sunset. And like the balancing of that color space is so delicate and really beautiful at how it communicates the passage of time. And there's just a lot of shots here that just make such great use of geometric space that reminds me of Kigami Yoshiji, or reminds me of Takemoto Yasuhiro, that both of them I think are like very geometric kind of directors. Like, they find really interesting shapes and use those shapes. So there's lots of repeating shapes of circles, using like the cups and the saucers they have, and they're eating these little like rectangular or square cookies. You have this long sequence in there where after the bomb has dropped, that this guy is Asuka's dad, which is just an amazing reveal with this totally dumbstruck Kumiko, which is one of my favorite Kumiko faces. Her just like, huh? But after that, that conversation, breaking it down, is this top-down shot looking down at them that holds on the shot for a long time, where they're sitting along this round table, this circular table. Then on the table are two different saucers. On top of those that are circular, on top of those circular saucers are circular cups that are the little like cute cat cups. And then one of those cups on top of the saucer is also on top of a circular plate, which on the other side of that circular plate is a big circular bowl that has a bunch of little cookies in it. So there's just this like all these kind of concentric circles, but they're all slightly out of order, like they're orbits or something. And it's just such a great, this top-down shot of like using all the shapes in this room and all centering it around this like weird confluence of circles in the middle of it. It's so evocative to me. It reminds me of some of the stuff in like Kitauji in Someday in the Rain, in like using the spacing of all the objects in that room in the Yuki shot they hold on for like a minute. It's got that kind of energy to it.
Absolutely. And the cookies are these little checkerboard cookies that are black and white, effectively, or black and brown. And so they have their own kind of alternating, geometric language that we see. In the far up shot, we don't really see that, but in the close-ups, you get a lot of that. Yeah, absolutely. It's, oh my God, it's fascinating, beautiful imagery. Then there's the whole sequence where we start getting these weird canted angles, like the characters are turning akin to the hands of a clock. It's very hard to describe, but of course the sequence ends with another shot of because time is such a factor here. It's like, the mom is arriving late, so that's why we can't see her. There's a deadline coming with the competition, and then the characters kind of get embroiled in this as well with this very interesting, weird choice that feels like it's like something out of Beyond the Boundary, but the power's put to good this time in a story that is worthy of it, with the characters kind of turning around with the hands of time.
Yeah, because you have that once, because it's a little subtle at first, and then eventually you have this great shot of Asuka, who, if you're like reading it literally, looks like she is like would be falling straight down to the ground because she's perfectly parallel to the ground. It's just because the camera has rotated, and then you just have like the very kind of uncomfortable shot of it's now rotated even further, and Kumiko is basically like suspended, kind of sticking out of the top left corner of the frame, like she's suspended in space, and it's such like a. She's rotated all the way around past that point where now it starts to feel very like strange and uncomfortable. But again, it all is communicating this like intense conversation they're having where Asuka's laying out her whole past. Because at this point, the conversation is where she's starting to reveal the amount of self-awareness she has about kind of how she thinks of herself as an awful person, where she starts talking about how, I blocked Nozomi from joining the club because she wanted to be able to meet her dad, or at least play for her dad. So she had this very personal, selfish, understandably selfish, but still selfish reason that she wanted to push to nationals, when before she didn't really care about it, right? It seems like early on, she just wanted to be able to play. She did not care about the tournaments. But once she finds out about the dad, a kind of turns on the character. And in season 2, there's just a point at which all of a sudden Asuka's really passionate about getting to nationals. This is where you learn why, when she's never seemed to care about that before, right? And this is the thing that Reina comments on early in the train in this episode, is like, she's never read Asuka as being this person who cares that much about the competitions, who really wants to get to nationals. She just seems like a person who wants to be able to play her instrument. As long as she can play her euphonium, that's all she cares about. And so this is where you kind of see how manipulative Asuka has been towards her own ends and her own purposes. And that really kind of is causing her to push herself deeper and deeper into this mental hole that Kumiko is actually trying to save her from. And then this is then what leads us into the end of this episode. This absolutely gorgeous scene that is an echo of episode 8 from season 1, where you get out of these like really dark, oppressive, burnt orange hues out now into the blues and like bright blues and greens of the outside. They go to this riverbank that is awesome, that has all these like depressed squares on the side of the riverbank where they go and sit down. And she plays the euphonium here for Kumiko, and this is where you get this full diegetic performance of the song that we'll later come to know is called Sound Euphonium, while you get all these different shots of nature, these cats like hanging out on this fence. and them just looking out at the world in this riverbank while she plays this song. And that just basically closes out the episode, where then it goes back into the house. It's black, dark in the house. You see the notebook that the dad gave to Asuka. You see the letter that he sent to Asuka that's all crumpled up and has been taped over and stuff to fix it. And that's where Kumiko says her, and now the next piece begins. And then it just ends without a tease for the next episode or anything like that. It just fades out there. It's so beautiful. I mean, the music is incredible, but the imagery also is just... It feels like it communicates so much about Asuka and what she wants and who she is and what she's shackled to, as she describes it herself, that she's like shackled to her past and her mother. But she wants to be out in this like big, beautiful world with everybody else, but she's trapped in that dark orange box of her house the whole time. And it's just, this episode took my breath away. Like, it was unbelievable. And then when I looked up the director, I was like, oh, okay, yeah. This feels like an episode of Violet Evergarden. It's got that kind of fragility to it and this beauty to it that show has. That I was like, okay, yeah, Yoshitate Taichi, like, you've been very good, but it feels like he kind of leveled up to the next level as a director, because this episode's just insane.
I would agree. And that whole final stretch where they go outside and she plays the song, one thing I love about it is it's the setting of like every Yasujiro Ozu movie. It's the part where they're like on the elevated kind of road above sort of the houses, and then they go over to the riverbank, and it's this very classical like Japanese riverbank where they've built kind of the stone side under the bridge where people can go sit and like look at the river. And just Ozu very much likes to get out of the house and then go do scenes here. If we're going to leave the household at all, that's where we're often going to get these scenes, all the way back to like his silent films. So I kind of, it's got that kind of feel to it. But then, yeah, the performance is gorgeous, and it's a great way to end this episode that is about the mystery of this character, where we're coming to understand more about the way she is and who she is, but you still kind of can't put it into words, and then the song does that for you. Like, that is the thing, is that I feel like in this moment, that is the closest Kumiko has come to understanding this person, is when they are on the riverbank and she's listening to Asuka play the song. That is where it feels like she starts to get some sense of who this person is. And it's just one of the ways this show uses music and location and imagery so effectively, is to go beyond words in big moments like this.
Yeah, and using the music as a fundamental part of the plot and the characters and like underpinning everything there. That's what it like really boils down to. And more is communicated about Asuka in this song than everything in that big, crazy conversation they had in that house.
Yes. And the episode is also just called Sound Euphonium,
yep.
Which is kind of a fun thing. Obviously, that's also, we don't know it yet. It's a preview that the song will be called that, and we learn that in the finale. But it is always notable when a show has a title, an episode with the same title as the show. And there you go. This one earned its big title drop.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So then you get this all kind of comes to a head then in episode 10, where episode 10 is a Yamamoto Taki episode. This is, I think, the best episode he's directed. This is the one where it's sort of like two big conversations. That's part of what I love about this episode, is it's very like clearly balanced, where the first half of the episode is this big conversation between Kumiko and her sister, where that sister plotline kind of comes to a head. And one of the great touches on this scene is it feels so cinematic, because it is the sister has fucked up cooking miso soup or whatever, and so the soup is burned and it's stuck on the inside of the pot. And then Kumiko's like, okay, fine, I'll fucking make dinner, because she can make dinner better than her sister, because Kumiko's, she's now in high school, right? She's starting to grow up, and in some ways is maybe a little bit maturer than her sister is. And so you have this big conversation where the sister is desperately scrubbing out the gunk from the inside of the pot while Kumiko is quietly preparing dinner. And it's just that like physical actions that the two characters are taking fundamentally underpinning what they're trying to do, right? Where, especially with the sister, that she's just trying to rub out and get rid of all this gunk of her life, right? All these mistakes and regrets that she's lived with, of abandoning the trumpet, the trombone, and her like going to this like college she didn't really want to go to because she wants to be a beautician and all this stuff, and her just kind of letting her life be swept along, thinking that that's what it was to be an adult, is just to sort of do what people tell you and go to the good school and get the good grades, and that's just it. And her life is, from her perspective, like kind of ruined. I mean, obviously not irreparably, but it's not what the life that she's wanted to live, and she's now realizing that the life that she wants to live is up to her to live, but first she has to scrub out the gunk from the pot, both literally and metaphorically, and just makes for this very dynamic feeling scene that it's all fixated on these actions the two characters are taking while they're having this conversation.
Yes, I was going to mention this if you didn't. I love the staging of this scene. It goes back to something we've been talking about with KyoAni from the beginning, is they tend to gravitate towards source material that is challenging to adapt into a visual medium because it's very wordy and based on people talking in rooms. And you have to find ways to make that visually interesting, and they are the masters of that. And this feels like a very much a Haruhi kind of scene in that way.
Yes.
Of like the way it kind of finds a way into what is could be a much drier presentation of dialogue, but finds a way to double the themes of the dialogue through what is going on in the image. It's very good. The scene after this is where Kumiko is on the train, and she's thinking about her sister and getting the sense that, like, this phase of their lives is over now, and starts, like, unconsciously, she starts crying on the train, doesn't even really realize she does it. And in a signal that we are in Japan and not in, like, New York, the other people on the train think this is weird and kind of look away. Whereas, in America, I feel like that's just, you see that every day on the subway. But in Japan, you control yourself emotionally on the train.
Yeah, I do like the furtive glances, the little like they're sort of like looking and then looking back and looking and looking back. It is very funny. But yes, it's a very touching moment of her reflecting on this relationship with her sister. One little detail, and this has been in the background of a couple episodes, I like that they note that they physically show you that we are now in late October because they're like Halloween advertisements and stuff in the background, and that's just like a nice little detail that adds a little bit of flavor to the setting. I also love the detail of when we come back from the Eyecatch, that Kumiko is like looking, she has a compact and she's looking to check to make sure her eyes aren't too red from crying, which is such a great little observed detail. Feels so lived in for the character. But then that leads into like the big set piece for this episode, which is Kumiko finally realizes she has had enough of Asuka's horseshit, and she's going to go like have a real heart-to-heart and not just like listen, but she has to say her piece. And that leads to this like very long, very intense conversation that where Asuka stops being so passive towards Kumiko, right? And she directs some of that venom, where you see a little bit of that energy from that awkward scene with Kaori in the previous episode, where she like really kind of tears Kumiko down, telling her that's like, you're just this passive person, you sit on the sidelines, you set up boundaries, you're curious, but you just observe. And she says this really brutal thing where she says, do you really think that anyone would tell someone like that how they honestly feel? Because of course Asuka thinks that everyone is like her. She thinks that everyone is playing a game, that everyone is manipulating, everyone is hiding what they really feel and who they truly are. And that's how she views the world, is that everybody else is like that, when the reality is most of these other people aren't like that, right? Like, no, like the other people legitimately care about Asuka. They actually want her back in the band because they like her for who she is, and not just because they think that it will be better for getting to nationals or whatever. But Asuka has she is so convinced of her worldview, and she is so good at getting people to back down that she almost sort of cows Kumiko here. There's a great little sequence where, while she is doing this, and sort of part of the most intense part of this kind of attack that Asuka's laying out, you have a shot in the corner of this little, like, outer corridor they're in, where there's a spider web that has caught all these like leaves and some butterflies and stuff, and then it flips that shot around and you see it from the other side, where you look through the spider web at Kumiko, who's at first out of focus, and then the focus shifts through the spider web onto Kumiko, because she has now been, obviously she's caught in the web of manipulation that Asuka has, where she is now trying to completely tear Kumiko down and rip her apart in order to try to get rid of the situation, where Asuka like wants to go this path she's decided, even if it's clearly the wrong thing for her to do. And then luckily Kumiko has her big hero moment where she says, basically, go fuck yourself. Like, no, like, I want to play with you. Like, I don't care about any of this other shit. Like, yeah, I'm a kid. You are a kid. Stop being so goddamn full of yourself. If you want to play in this band, you should play in the band. And I want you to play in the band because I like you and I want to play with you. You stupid piece of shit. With that part's me editorializing a little bit. But
I think you should do the fan subs for this, Sean, and just put that all in there.
But the energy of it is like so intense, and this is where Kurosawa Tomoyo, the voice actress for Kumiko, like really pushes herself really far.
Yes.
And I think it's such a raw performance where Kumiko just leaves it all out there. And it shows the amount of growth that she's had as a character, right? Like, if you think about her here compared to where we saw this character start at the beginning of season 1, who was so emotionally unaffected by their team not moving on to finals or to nationals or whatever, and she just looks over at Reina's like, what, you really thought we would go to nationals? And she was such a like laid back, removed character who was at a distance from everybody. Here she's so invested in the band, but also in these people that she cares about. She has so much in her. It's just bursting out. And I love it. I love the amount of growth you see from her as a character and how powerful the scene is.
Yeah, I like this scene a lot, too. I think it's one of the ones that I've maybe found slightly overheated on the melodrama of it, if only because I think they had done quite a few scenes like this leading up to this, and so I think the impact of it is slightly muted for me, and that's where some of the extra length and repetition comes into play for me. But I agree with everything you're saying. I particularly think the performances in this scene are beautiful, and I think the way the writing, the conversation is structured as this series of attempts to like get through Asuka's walls, it's over and over again. It is Kumiko just trying to find what is the thing to say to this person to try to get through to them, and those walls just keep getting thicker. And it's she kind of has to both be direct and kind of gamify it through her own desires to get Asuka to realize what she is saying. It's like, I want to play with you. Like, put it in that like I want statement, like, you think I'm playing a game and what I want. And she finds this way in of like, I want to play in this band with you. We all want to do that. And she kind of finds a way to put it in the language Asuka understands and thinks through, which also allows her to understand, I think, how limiting her own worldview is. You know what I mean? Like, it accomplishes both of those things. Yeah,
and I think it's so satisfying to see Asuka as a character get taken down a peg because she's so dominant. Whenever she's in a scene, she controls that scene and she controls the other people in that scene because that's what she's learned how to do as a person. And so that's kind of how the character functions. And it's just like really nice to finally have her be called out on that bullshit, because there have always been these little moments where Asuka just feels off kilter and a little off base, which again, we learn that, like, we see why that is, why she's kind of a little bit out of sync with everybody else, because she lives a very different life than other people. She has different kinds of concerns than most of these other high school students have, but that has distorted her worldview so much. And Kumiko has to like blow that worldview up and show her that's like, no, you are so inside your own head. You have no idea how much you're limiting yourself, which is what Asuka's doing. And it is just like a great moment. And I love the way the scene ends where she kind of pats Kumiko on the head. It's not clear at first whether or not this has really worked. And then you get this POV shot of Kumiko who's looking down and you just see Asuka's like legs like tremble a little bit. It's just like the outlines on her legs just like quiver in terms of the animation. It's a very simple little thing that only happens in a couple of frames, but it's enough to give you the sense of the actual impact and how Asuka's barely holding it together. And I like that Kumiko says, "Hey senpai, can I look at your face?" And Asuka says, "No, if you do, I will curse your family for 1,000 generations."
I love that moment.
Amazing. And then of course you get the whole scene where she runs off to take this exam, and then at the end she comes back. She apparently is top 30 in the mock exams or whatever, which is like, holy shit. Asuka's very good at this stuff. She's a very brilliant person, even if she is a complete idiot at the same time, which is very much the character she is. And you have, your classic Kumiko says, Tadaima and all this kind of stuff. So then we have her, she gives this little smile. And I like you do get a little bit of this foreboding of like what's going on with Reina here, but it ends on this gorgeous shot of their two euphoniums, the brass and the silver one, like lined up next to each other. It's great. It's just a great episode.
Great episode. Absolutely. And then the final three as well. Episode 11, we already touched on a lot of things that happened in this episode because this is basically the Reina episode of the season where we get back to that. And this is where I have some questions for you, Sean, because I know... So this is where we get into Reina having a crush on Taki Sensei and kind of dealing with the emotions around that. This is the episode where she, I think very unfairly to poor Taki Sensei, confronts him in the classroom, right? And is like making him tell her about his dead wife. which is probably the ugliest Reina ever gets on this show. She doesn't know how bad I think that is, but, I think from an adult perspective that feels... Taki-sensei deals with that very maturely, but I feel bad for the poor guy. The dude's fallen asleep at school because he has nowhere else to go, and then his student is like, no, tell me personally about the wife you're grieving. I feel very bad for him. But I'm curious how you feel about sort of how it handles this, because I know the kind of... And obviously this show doesn't ever come close to crossing that boundary in any kind of way, but it is about a student having a crush on a teacher, which is a thing that happens. Nothing wrong with like that being acknowledged as a thing in a piece of fiction. I think it's interesting, and like Taki-sensei never does anything wrong or over the line or immature here. He handles it. To be honest, it seems like he is unaware of it, if anything.
I think he's completely unaware of it, yeah.
Yeah. So, you have all of that. But I know this is a thing that when this comes up in anime, this is sometimes a pet peeve for you. So I'm curious how you react to this side of the story.
Well, so for me, the thing is that it's obviously it's a very delicate topic that needs to, I think, be handled well. And it's a thing where it is a big trope in a lot of Japanese fiction. And like, honestly, particularly, it's a lot of fiction written by women of high school or sometimes even younger girls getting in relationships with their male teachers. Like, it's a major plot point in Cardcaptor Sakura. One show that like did it extremely well, because it's very kind of smart about how it handles it, is Maison Ikkoku, which is one of my favorite rom-com animes ever. But that one is about the main character. One of the main characters was in a relationship with her teacher shortly out of graduating high school, got married to him. He died very young, and so she's widowed in her like 23 or something like that. That show uses it well because it shows how, because of that experience, that character never really grew up. She never really became an adult because she got in this relationship with a teacher, which stunted her like kind of emotional development. But oftentimes it can be like skeevy and it can go too far. Here, I have no problem with it. Here, it feels very realistic. I mean, it is a reality that students will end up having romantic feelings for their teachers, or like, and oftentimes it's like what you have here with Reina, that it's like this weird crush, but whether or not it's like a legitimate romantic feeling, I think is actually a little bit open to interpretation. Like, I don't think Reina really even understands what she feels for Taki-sensei, because he is so wrapped up with her music and like her life as a musician. And you see in this episode, it goes back to this incredibly young age where you have this great flashback where you see her playing the piano with this girl, and she is way better than her. This, like, they're elementary school kids. And the girl gets upset because she's like, Reina, like, you can't just keep saying that, like, just be better. Like, I don't have a piano at home like you. And the girl runs off. And it's this like kind of privilege check moment of Reina comes from this very prestigious musical family that's clearly very well-to-do, and her family is so musical. She comes home from that experience and then sees this young, handsome guy who at that point, Taki was probably in high school, and he's talking to Reina's parents, and that's where this fixation takes root. And so to me, it's so wrapped up in her identity as a musician, this feeling of like kind of loneliness she has, where she comes from a very privileged and unique background from a musical family, and Taki-sensei is one of the only people she knows in her life that also comes from that background, and she's very kind of inspired by him. And then you have this, then it transitions to this other flashback of her probably in middle school here, where Taki-sensei, and I feel like the implication here is this is probably shortly after he lost his wife, he comes and he gives her this piece of music and tries to encourage her, which this whole scene reads to me from Taki's perspective is he's reflecting on his own relationship with music from the loss of his wife, and is trying to reach out to this young person and try to do something to be a positive force to kind of cope with this grief. But from her perspective, it is this like, it's like the god of music to her, like this guy that she has like idolized coming and personally giving her this piece of music and saying how much he thinks she's a really talented musician. And then that obviously then has this great smash cut to her in the classroom in the present day, absolutely bombing this fucking solo, being terrible at it, and he rips her apart because she's completely distracted. But I think I like the way that they contextualize her feelings for Taki-sensei, because to me, I don't think there's any kind of like, I don't feel a dissonance between her very like intimate relationship with Kumiko and her expressed romantic feelings for Taki-sensei, because it feels to me like she has her whole she's confused. Her whole worldview is warped around this very intense relationship she has with music, and how Taki is like inextricably tied into that. And she has, as a young person, she has no means of really extracting how does she feel about Taki as a human being? What does she even know about him as a person? Versus what does he represent to her? And she's in love with that idea of this guy. And I think that's a little bit of what you get at this conversation at the end, where you get the most access to who he is inside. And he is this like very quiet, kind of, sort of like weak is too strong of a word, but kind of a little bit insecure and very introspective person that is, you see a little bit more of like, he lets himself show a little bit more weakness. He's so kind of strong as a teacher and very firm with his criticisms and his instructions. Whereas here he is quiet and he kind of lets himself open up a little bit more. And you see a little bit of who he is as a person. And all of that is tied into his relationship with his wife. And this whole life he's had, he comes from a completely different world in so many ways than Reina, that goes far beyond the fact that they both come from musical families. And I like the way that kind of like helps evolve the dynamic of this relationship.
Yeah. So I broadly agree with all of that, and I think those are very good reflections on how this relationship plays out. I think the thing I was sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop in this whole sort of subplot we get this season is, and maybe it comes in the movie or season 3 or something, I don't know how long they keep going with this, but the moment where Reina sort of comes to some conscious realization that this is a sort of childish fantasy that is weird. And I think this episode sort of feels like it does it in the ending sequence where they go to visit the wife's grave and leave the flowers and she prays. And I like that moment a lot. I think it's a nice little moment of her, like only in Reina's head does this quite make sense, but it does make sense of her realizing this is this person that Taki Sensei is sort of, in a sense, doing this all for. And so she goes and pays those respects too, and it's sort of the way she gets her groove back. And I think that's a cool moment where I feel like you could sort of leave this subplot off there because it kind of feels emotionally resolved. And then in episode 12, it is brought up several more times, but it's played more as it's a running gag in that episode. It's a joke that happens several times, and then it kind of isn't brought up again. So it winds up feeling unresolved in the season because we get that kind of emotional cap and then a couple of jokes about it, but nothing more.
Yeah, I agree that like what I would have preferred is to not have the like what feel like a little bit more kind of cliche scenes in episode 12 and 13 of her, or I guess it is all just in episode 12 because she does the big like when all the other teachers get their call outs, she jumps up and says, teacher, like, Taki Sensei, I love you. And everyone just interprets it as a call out. Which that's, fine, but it feels like it goes a little bit against the amount of emotional resolution that episode 11 implies.
Yes.
So it feels a little awkward. And then you have like a similar joke later of her telling that to him, her being like, no, I came to the school for you. Like, I do really, really like you, which I kind of like that moment a little bit for like Taki Sensei's realization that the students like him. But I would have preferred if that wasn't as much also wrapped up in the goopiness of the like student in love with him, and he's misunderstanding because the word ski is very context based, and the way it's being used in context makes it very clear that you would not say this if you meant I'm romantically interested in you. It absolutely makes 100% more sense for him to interpret it as like, I like you as a teacher. You've been very good to me as a teacher is how you would actually interpret those sentences as a sane person, which is of course what Taki Sensei does.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same page about this. And the thing I like about those moments in episode 12 is less for Reina than I just like Taki Sensei feels like he's getting some confidence. Like he says that to Reina, like, thank you for saying that, he's like touched his students did that. And then later he's like, oh man, thank you guys. Like you can tell he's a little bashful about this, but like he's proud of those kids and he's glad those kids are proud of him. This is nice.
Yeah. There's a real aw shucks quality to it that I enjoy. Yeah. From Taki Sensei for sure. Yeah.
Yes. But speaking of episode 12, this is our second Kigami Yoshichi episode, storyboarded with him and Yamada Naoko. That's a dream team right there.
Yep.
And it is very good, even though the episode does what in the moment feels unexpected, although I think when you look back at it, it makes total sense. At the act break where we do the eye catch is on him doing the downbeat of the song and starting the conducting, and then we come back and it's over, and so it's all about kind of the other sides of the performance. And while that is not necessarily what I expected, I really like that choice because this episode gets to be really embroiled in the emotions of the day of the competition, this is the thing they were building towards. And whether or not they won or not, there would be the inevitable kind of fall off in the second half. There is then the, okay, we did all the work. There's literally nothing else we can do. The year is done, right? The third years are graduating. And so the third years have this very kind of like devil may care attitude where they're all just kind of like, our responsibilities are over. We're going to go have fun. Kumiko is more kind of racked with anxiety. Everyone's thinking about these things. And while they wind up coming in with a bronze, which, to be fair, they shouldn't be as ashamed of as they are. This is an amazing thing this school did, going from no nationals to nationals in 1 year.
Yes.
Holy shit. I feel like someone should say that to them. But in any case, they learned that. But like, I think the episode, whether or not they had even done better or not, the point of the episode is kind of the build up and the come down from this moment that you think defines everything. But, and I think this is really true for whatever your high school activity was, it kind of doesn't. It's things are just over afterwards, whether you got the bronze or the gold or whatever. And you have the final speeches from the president and the vice president and all that stuff. And I think the way they play that is lovely, as well as doing Kumiko's sort of resolution with her sister, which is a very nice moment there, too.
Yeah, I think I was very surprised in the moment as well, but I think it was the right choice, because it would have felt incredibly repetitive to have yet another big scene, especially if the scene is meant to communicate, well, they're not quite as good as they were the last time, or they are as good, but that being that good is not worth gold at nationals. They were not able to take it to the next level. I think like you can get all of that across without even needing to see the performance. And then what that does is it gives them all this space in this episode to tell the story of what these events actually are, right? Where like, I didn't do band, but we did debate. And it's like, well, we need to debate. The time when you're debating is like 5% of your time at the event. Right?
That's generous, Sean. It's like 2%. It's nothing.
Yeah, like the vast majority of your time is there goofing around with your friends. You're going with like, oh, what are we going to get something for food? Like it's you looking for like, oh, there's other people like at this other school that I know to hang out with. Right? It's like the little bit of the prep work you do the thing, and then you wait around forever to see the results. And I like that it just gives you that extra space in this episode to just focus on that, the periphery, because that's what the day actually is. And the performance is almost like mechanical at that point. It is what it is. It's the thing that you've been practicing over and over and over again. It's the thing you've worked very hard for. We have seen that happen multiple times. Let's give the space for everything around it, because in some ways that's really what it's more about. And you have all these great little moments throughout the episode. There's a really amazing little callback at the very beginning where there's a little bit of a full circleness to it, where in episode 1 you're introduced to Mizore and Nozomi's characters in a flashback of them on the bus home from their middle school performance where they got silver, and you have these shots of Mizore looking out at her own reflection in the window, and Nozomi is sitting next to her, and they're not really looking at each other, but they're like talking at each other. And here you have the same shot of Mizore. She's kind of looking out at her reflection a little bit, and then Nozomi sits down next to her, and then Mizore turns, and they talk about, hey, like, let's win nationals. So there's a nice coming full circle there. You get all the girls playing card games in the room, whatever, that they have the night before. Tsukamoto Shuichi is there, who nobody really cares about that guy.
I mean, let's just pause there for a moment. I like the choice, and I'm assuming this is a Yamada Naoko scene. It feels like a Yamada Naoko scene in the storyboards, where a lot of their conversation is she's separated the two of them into separate frames where they are in the extreme corner of the frame, kind of away from each other. I don't know. There's a lot of the storyboarding techniques are about the distance between them, not any kind of real intimacy.
There's a sick statue of a samurai on a big horse, which looks rad. I assume that's a real statue that they use as reference. This is like, when we get to the end of this season, we should just put together the Kyoto Animation fucking drinking game of like, what are all the things where you have to take a shot? One of them 100% are like shots that linger on weird statues or other ephemera of real world locations that they spend more time lingering on than you would normally expect. And that's one of those, because I love whenever they do that. They have the statue at the school with the dude with the doves. That's the exact same thing. KyoAni loves their cool real world statues that they get to have and have cool shots with. So you have a big samurai guy. You have a great sequence with such a cool cut where after the performance, Reina is sitting out in like this field alone, just kind of quietly, thinking about the performance or whatever. And then you have this guy step right into the middle of the frame in the like super deep foreground, and then as he steps through, the camera cuts, so it cuts with the movement of his leg to Nozomi inside the building. It's just a really cool cut, and you just get like all these little moments with the characters. Kumiko looking for her sister, Nozomi and Mizore do their little fist bump, Asuka wants to go get like a super mega double parfait or whatever with her buddies, and everyone's just having fun.
Yes, and it's a good episode, and again, I think it's as you were saying, it's about that experience of the competition day, and the kind of letting the air out that comes at that moment, which episode 13, I think, takes that baton and really runs with it. Yeah. It's definitely, these two episodes have a lot of similarities to the last half of KO in season 2, I think. Although from a slightly different vantage point, because we are from the first year's perspective, who she's got a lot of time left, but we're seeing the third years go through this, whereas Keon, we have the student beneath them, but it's also we're seeing their perspective. So it's a little different, but I like seeing all of that. The final scene with the sister is very good, and yeah, it's a great episode.
Yeah, the scene with the sister is great. You have some nice closure with Asuka hearing through Taki Sensei about her dad, like complimenting the performance, which is really nice. But my favorite moment in this episode is Matsumoto Sensei, who is my favorite of all of the senseis. We've got 4 senseis now. Hashimoto got close because he's cool. He's got the great outfits. But Matsumoto, who's like the regular stern school teacher, she has this great moment where she just grabs Haruka, the club president, and she's just like, oh, you've worked so hard. And she's in tears. And I love it. I love this character so much because she feels so real to me, that like the way in which like sometimes the most hard ass teachers are also the ones that at the end of the year they're fucking bawling at graduation. Is so true. And I love that. Them two just like hugging and crying. And I think Haruka says like, okay, this is like a bit much. Like she's like, okay, you're kind of suffocating me, Sensei. There's a
beautiful moment with them at the beginning of episode 13 where they're both standing in the hallway looking out the window, and they're talking about, Taki Sensei says, yeah, this is my first time doing this, and it's so weird to kind of be going back to the beginning again. And she says, I like it. I like this rhythm of, kind of the circular nature of the school year. And I just took a mental note of that in my head and went, Sean probably loves this scene.
Yes, no, it's very true. It's like, and honestly, it's like it's more true for me than it is for them, because the school I currently work at only has 9th graders. So once the year is done, you ship those little gremlins off to the main campus, and they go do their sophomore, junior, or senior year, and you rarely, if ever, will see any of them again. For them, it's like, I mean, yes, so the year resets a little bit, but if you're running this club, I mean, you still have the majority of your students are still the same. You're getting one section of your students are graduating, you're getting a whole new section, right? So it's like there is a culture, and there are students that continue on. There's like this ebb and flow of time, but it is very true that like there is a weird melancholy that sets in that I'm currently kind of in the middle of right now at summer break, where you're both like very excited at the end of the year, you're excited to get a break, you're excited for what is the next year going to be like, but it's there's a lot of emotions around saying goodbye to all these people you have spent a lot of your life and time and energy working with and spending time with and all that kind of stuff. It's very true, and I like that Matsumoto, as this older teacher, has a more kind of mature outlook on it. Of she sees also the positives, that there's this kind of like exciting future that you get to start again, right? And as a teacher, it's like this moment of reflection, of thinking back, what are all the things I did this year that worked? What were the things I did this year that did not work? Like, what are the things I want to try to do better next time around? Because your outlook on it as a teacher is very different than the students, because they're going to move on, but you're going to stay here. And it's like you got another batch and you've got like you have ever more work to do. So yeah, it's a really touching little moment. And I love that shot that they have of this like very low angle shot from like the floor, looking up at the two of them, staring up at the blue sky as they talk about this. It's a great little moment.
Yeah, there's just, again, the show is never quite from their perspective, but it gets the reality of teaching. And I think of that whole cycle for the adults, that it understands that their perspective is very different. And I think there's some pieces of high school media that don't differentiate enough at that point between like the student's perspective and the teacher's perspective. I think this is a piece that gets it just right.
And lots of anime doesn't do that well. And usually I don't particularly care, but like, I think this feels a lot more grounded and realistic from the teacher perspective compared to, say, Sawa-chan Sensei and Keion. I love her to death, and there's so much great stuff with that character. She never really feels like an actual teacher to me, though.
She's a cartoon in a very real sense.
She feels like a real person, but she doesn't, in the world of the show, like, she feels like there's a lot of reality to her, but it doesn't feel like a lot of care is taken to try to make her feel relatable as a teacher to other teachers, whereas Taki Sensei, Matsumoto Sensei, Hashimoto Sensei, Niyama Sensei, all the 4 teacher characters, they all feel very real to me. They all feel like teachers. There are like very particular details about them and their interactions with students and the way they see the school and their work that feel very real to me in a way that anime almost never does, usually because it's not focused on the teacher characters. But I appreciate it's something I just appreciate about this whole show is it's got much more grounded viewpoint on what it is to be in a high school, whoever you are, than most anime do.
Yeah, absolutely. I do wish there was some scene in here in episode 12 or 13 where Taki Sensei just got in front of the group and said, guys, I know the bronze was kind of disappointing. You did go from like not getting past like the most basic prefectural level to nationals in 1 year. You guys did great. I feel like there should be a little bit more of the like, wow, this Kitauji High School came out of fucking nowhere to like barrel to the top. He did something kind of incredible with these kids.
Yeah, I think you could assume that probably conversation happened somewhere in there. But yes, it is true that like just on the point of like trying to keep it believable, they could not have let the school get gold at nationals. Like, it just would have been insane.
This is totally right. And my prediction is that it's 3 seasons. It's 3 years. They got bronze this time, I assume, in the movie, and I don't know the facts. I assume they get silver, and then I assume in season 3 they get gold, and that's how the story ends. It's the show Friday Night Lights, one of the only things that ever messes up. That show, well, other outside of season 2, that season's a mess. But in season 1, because they thought they were going to get canceled, they end season 1 with the team like winning state, which is inexplicable. That season is very clearly building up to the thing where they lose, but it's a Pyrrhic victory and all of that. But instead they just win, and it's an awkward thing for them to have to deal with for the rest of the series. So
once it's like if Rocky had won at the end of Rocky 1, you wouldn't have Rockies 2 and onward, however fucking like 80 Rocky movies there are. It's not that many. If you throw the Creed ones in there and all that stuff, there's a lot of Rocky movies. If you can't have a bunch of Rocky movies if you just win in the first one, because how you can't top that. You can't top, I won. Like, what do we do next time? But I think you're right that like it feels like there should have been a little bit more from the teacher, but you do have this scene that I think is communicating a lot of these ideas just through the kind of imagery and the montage and music, where you have the big graduation party that happens.
Yes.
Where you have all this great stuff of all these like little like kind of games they're playing, and they put on like a weird little comedy performance or something. The club president gets a thing from Yuko, because another part of this is we learn that Yuko is going to be the next club president. Then Natsuki Senpai is going to be the vice president, which I'm very excited to see that dynamic in the movie, because that sounds very funny. And then you have, probably the best part of this is you have a little home movie thing, which this is so fucking true about like the like end of year banquets for a club. We put together a little video, and here's all the goofy shit we did at like the band camp in this video. Asuka does her little magic show where she has flowers come out of a big tuba, which hopefully the tuba was not injured or harmed in the process of this magic trick.
It's going to be a big plot point in the movie is that the tuba was destroyed and they have to get a better one, and they have to bring Asuka back because she's the one who damaged it.
Yes, that's I think that is the plot of movie 2, hopefully. And then you have 2 musical performances. Then you have one musical performance from the seniors, right? And then you have one from the first years and second years.
The continuing members who the third years do this kind of like fun song we haven't heard them do before, and then the remaining members do the piece that they do every time in their competition. I forget what that piece is called, but it's the one they're like always
Dance of the Crescent Moon or something like that. Yeah.
But they do it here without the third years there. So there's, specific moments like Kumiko doing that little euphonium solo that she worked so hard on back in season 1, but now she's doing it alone without Asuka. And I have to say, my 2 favorite scenes in this entire season are the performance in episode 5, and it's the performance of the same song here in episode 13. And it is because they are so superhumanly good at communicating through imagery and sound. And it is that this scene, like the scene in episode 5, does such a good job of telling a story about these characters through these songs. And it's the exact same song, but it's such a different story at this point, where this is a less polished performance. It's a less full-bodied performance because they don't have, you know, all of their members there. The acoustics of the room they're playing in are not as good as the big concert hall, but it's full of heart, goddammit. And you can feel the love that they are pouring into it, and the reactions of all the third years, because a lot of the scene is watching the third years watch them. And so you have, you know, the Saimi Haori character, the club president, you know, obviously break down in tears, while Asuka has this smile on her face that I think is notable because it feels so much more genuine than a lot of the smiles we saw from her in the past, you know? I think she truly is at a kind of level of peace here in this moment, seeing what has been done and that, you know, life will go on here. And it has some really beautiful flashbacks to the life of the series, where this is fully feels like, you know, I know they already planned to do more, but, you know, if something were to happen, this is a great series finale, because that moment is such a summation of everything up to this point. And I just think it's beautiful. This show, to me, is at its best when they are playing their instruments. I think that is where the show just does something that no other show is capable of doing. And the show does lots and lots of other things beautifully and really, really powerfully, but this is the thing that this is the only show that does this, so holy crap.
Yeah, and it's the way in which all, the character relationships and all that kind of stuff come to a head in these big musical performances, yeah. And yeah, you have the huge montage of all the different moments of all these people together, and it definitely hits the heartstrings in that, graduation story kind of way, similar to, K-On! Or some of the other high school anime I've seen that do these big kind of graduation arcs. It's very effective. But then you have, obviously, really the core of this episode, though, is while all of this is happening, Kumiko is desperately seeking this, closure. She verbalizes this at the very beginning of the episode in a conversation with Reina at the convenience store. And the whole time she's trying to find some, moment to have a one-on-one, a final heart-to-heart with Asuka to get some kind of closure with that relationship because of how much that means to her. You know, because the whole relationship with Asuka, again, that is also wrapped up in her whole relationship with her sister and all this stuff. So she's Asuka gives the big valedictorian speech, and then Kumiko's desperately looking for her while everyone's doing their graduation stuff. And you have all these little great moments where you kind of have Kumiko running past all these other people having the graduation moments that are all the side characters. They're like, oh, senpai, what will I ever be able to do without you? And they're characters that this, for all we know, that, it might be the first time this characters have ever had a line, but you've seen them in all the musical performances. So I love you get these little moments of saluting each other. Matsumoto sensei pulls one young guy aside, is hey, don't make sure you act properly in college as well. And he starts tearing up.
Yes.
And it's a whole thing. And she starts running through the school. This is where you really get a K-On! Kind of vibe, where as Kumiko starts running through the school, you just get these series of shots of all the places in the school that are now empty, the classroom, the hallway where they practiced, all this stuff, while she's looking for Asuka. She ends up at that stairway in front of the school where she first saw Asuka, gets a flashback to the beginning of episode 1 where they were doing the really terrible performance on the stairs to advertise the club, and that's where she ultimately ends up running into Asuka, and you have this one last little moment where Kumiko, kind of tells her everything that she feels, how much she loves Asuka, how much she's loved being able to play, how much being able to play with her has meant to her, and all this. But
also tells her how much she hated her at first. That's first half of the scene.
That's true.
Is the entire, because that's what I think gets Asuka to warm up to her in this scene and allow her to have this whole moment of kind of closure. Is she starts by being brutally honest, and Asuka's yeah, I knew all of this, but I think Asuka also appreciates the brutal honesty because it's how she is too.
Yeah, so that it's the whole she explains that whole scope of the relationship and how kind of weird and awkward and standoffish it was at first to developing into this very rich thing. And then of course Asuka gives Kumiko the notebook. She does this little thing I adore where she fluffs the little tufts of hair that Kumiko has that come out
yes.
at the bottom of her haircut, and she sort of plays with them like she's a fucking dog or something, and it's adorable. Kumiko says, I don't want to say goodbye, right? She doesn't want to say sayonara. And so Asuka says, well, then let's not. Walks down the stairs, turns around and says, I'll see you later, and then disappears into the snow. And then you come full circle, where you have a series of shots that are the series of shots that open episode 1, of Kumiko in the snow holding the notebook. She then opens the notebook, and that's where you see the moment. That's a very tearjerker moment to me, of her seeing the title Sound Euphonium. And that's what the title of the song is. It's obviously also the name of our show, but it's what, like, in this moment, what that title represents. Where I think, like, what the euphonium is as an instrument, like, really kind of comes to the fore of this person who's in the background, who doesn't seem that important, who doesn't stand out that much, but is the person that supports everyone and brings everyone together, because the euphonium is this member of the sort of bass section, but is also not like the member of the bass section that everyone notices, like the tuba that has like the big giant crazy instrument, or, you know, the big string stuff. It is this instrument that kind of just blends into the background, but is the one that supports everybody. And so it kind of, to me, flashes to that moment in episode 9 we didn't comment on, but there's a great little piece of dialogue where Asuka tells Kumiko that, like, the moment she saw Kumiko, she's like, I can't believe that someone so much like a euphonium could actually exist, because Asuka doesn't think of herself like a euphonium because she's big and crazy and outgoing and all these things, that is not emotionally resonant with the role the instrument has. But Kumiko is. Like, Kumiko is that euphonium, like, made manifest. And so the song passed down to Asuka from her father, that now Asuka is passing on to Kumiko to bring forward into the club, and it's called Sound Euphonium. And the Reina comes out and brings Kumiko in, and she starts running back in, slow motion. She comments on the title. The title appears on the screen. You get your kanji shu, the end, and then you have a shot of the euphonium and the notebook on a desk while the Sound Euphonium, the song, plays. That's a unique version of that song over the end credits. And goddamn, like, the gut punch of this and the emotional resonance of all these things, all the little threads, the character dynamics between Kumiko and Asuka and what that means and how it relates to their music, how it relates to who they are as these developing young people, and this instrument, the euphonium, all coming together in this beautiful thing of Sound Euphonium. Like, get out there, euphonium, make your sound, be proud, be who you are, and support these people. It's great. It's such a tearjerker ending. I love it.
It's a perfect ending. It's fantastic. I definitely thought a lot about the ending of K-On! I think it's got a similar kind of just solidity to it that is very powerful. It is yet another Kyoto Animation ending where in the closing seconds they explain the title of the show diegetically. I like that. I always like that trick. Same thing that Love, Chinibyo, and Other Delusions did at the end of season 2, and some other shows that we have watched. But it is very good. And yeah, it is Sound Euphonium. It is the song. It is the way of life. It is the people. They are the euphoniums. They must sound. They have no voice, and they must sound.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yes, bringing it all full circle here, Sean. I'm so good at this. Podcasting is easy. Sean, anything else to say about Sound Euphonium 2? I do love that the title of the season is just Sound Euphonium 2. That's pretty great. They could have done Sound with 2 exclamation marks and then Euphonium, a la K-On! Season 2, and that would have been even funnier, but I do like just putting a 2 on it. That's pretty great.
Yeah, or they could have made it even more confusing and just said, no, it's Sound Euphonium 2 plus 3, because they're adapting the novels Sound Euphonium 2 and the novel Sound Euphonium 3. So let's use the Kingdom Hearts
made by
model.
Hideaki Anno, Sean. That's who would have done that.
Yes, or Eva or Kingdom Hearts. I love this show. I've loved this show after season 1. For me personally, I love season 2 even more. Like, I think a lot of it has to do with the 2 big side characters here in particular, Mizore and Asuka, that to me, they just resonate so deeply. I think these 2 characters are so perfectly depicted. The psychology of who they are and how that relates to everything else in the show is so potent. And then obviously, like, that filters through Kumiko, who I mentioned this in season 1, I think she's just like an incredibly well-written protagonist character. I think protagonist characters like this are hard to do, because it's hard to have your character that is the anchor of the show, but also is not going to be the most interesting character in the show, but is the one who has to show the most growth, drive everything, but have enough of a spine to them that it really attracts you to them. And I think, like, she's just such a well-written and such a well-performed character. She performs that role perfectly. But to me, the one thing I do want to leave this with is just shouting out again Kotobuki Minako, who is the voice actress that plays Tanaka, who we, of course, also had Mugi and K-On! But this character, Asuka, like, this is to me like an all-time great character in an anime. Like I talked about this a lot last time. There's something super Shakespearean about her. There is the sort of enigmatic elements of the character and how kind of mercurial she is in this ability that every time you try to get a hold of the character, she slips out of your grasp. And I think it's really fascinating how well they are able to tell a full story arc that brings that kind of character to a point of real conclusion and resolution without ever having ruined the things about the character that made them mysterious and interesting and compelling in the first place, which is a thing that can happen. It's a real danger of having this kind of character that you can run them into the ground when you have too much. And I think I just was so happy to see the way in which that character developed, getting this incredible episode 9 that really gets into her past, but having this core of the character ever be present. And I think a huge part of that is just how good that central performance is as her, Minako as Asuka, because it is, I think, must have been an incredibly hard character to play. There's so many sides, and the character is never showing you whatever her true heart is. But I think that actress was able to just express everything that character needed and more.
Oh, 100%. It is a tremendous performance. It's a wonderful character. I very much agree with you about it's rare to see this kind of character brought to the fore in the way they do. I think you're 100% right about that. There's something very unique going on there. No, absolutely. And this show, this is a very special show, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think it is, you can tell it is a special show to the people making it as well as the people watching it for all the reasons we are explaining here.
Yes. And I hope, Thomas, I was able to do it justice for you and hopefully like hold back the stem of overwhelming negativity coming from Jonathan, who just despised this season and hated season 2, while he was munching on his victims because he is a cannibal. I hope I was able to sort of counterbalance that a little bit, Thomas.
All right, next time on Japanimation Station, you wanted to end it there, and I'm not letting you, because I need to remind everyone what we're watching next time, which is Liz and the Bluebird. I have been so excited to get here. The last piece of Yamada Naoko Kyoto Animation work we are talking about, and I think just the last thing she did with them, right?
I believe so. I'd have to double check if she directed any episodes for anything after this, but I'm pretty sure that this is her last thing, like wholesale.
Yeah.
So yes, so Liz and the Bluebird will be able to revisit Nozomi and Mizore. I'm very excited for that. Obviously, we fucking love the silent voice, so getting
and all the other movies she has made so far. So, this is her 4th movie, and the first 3 are basically masterpieces. So let's see if this one is. That'll be next time on Japanimation Station. I cannot wait.
And the next piece continues.
愛しているだが君が一番大切だから夫婦としてダメだのってあなた言った自分にできないこと